Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is the August 13th study session. This is August 13th. We're getting started. This is the August 13th study session of City Council. And do you want to take roll? Do we take roll? Okay, never mind. I'm getting things confused. Okay, on our agenda, the first item on our agenda is housing study discussion. We have two presenters, Patty Silverstein and Nancy Burke. Patty? Okay, yeah, why don't we have Mike, the Deputy City Manager, Mike Broughton, go ahead and give a brief overview.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. You may recall a few months ago there was a request that there's so much new development coming forward to Littleton that we look at possibly evaluating what's going on in the market. And City Manager Penny thought that was a valid idea, and we found Patty, and she conducted this basically an overview of what's going on in the market and what it means to Littleton. And we thought it a very good report, and look forward to hearing what she has to say. So with that.
Thank you very much, Mike. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to come in and to talk about this study today. I'm Patty Silverstein. I'm the President and Chief Economist with Development Research Partners. We're an economic development related research company that is located in Jefferson County, and we do a lot of different industry studies, real estate studies, economic impact studies, economic and demographic trend information. So I also want to introduce you to David Hansen, who is one of our senior economists, has been with the company for about 6 years. David has done a lot of the research on this particular study as well, so we are both here as resources for you to, as we talk about the study and if you have any type of questions related to it. So with that, let me first of all tell you the intent of this study was to and is to understand some of the residential market trends that are influencing us here throughout the 7-county Metro Denver region. So we talk about counties all the way from Adams County on the north to Douglas County on the south, and more specifically, what is going on here within the city of Littleton. But we're also often comparing the Littleton statistics with the Metro Denver statistics so that we have some context, so that we know how Littleton is performing related to the Metro Denver marketplace. And then, so we're going to go through some of the economic trends that have been influencing housing. We're going to talk about some of those demographic trends influencing the housing, and then a little bit on some of the future issues. But let me also qualify this to say this is not a market feasibility study by any stretch of the imagination. This is really much more about where are we at right now in the marketplace. We don't make any type of recommendations as you need more of one type of housing or another, but really just trying to put it all into context as far as what the market conditions are currently. So I want to start first of all with just some very broad economic trends that have been influencing the housing market, starting a little bit at a national level, but zeroing in very quickly to what we have going on here within a local area. So at this whole very broad perspective here, all throughout the United States, we have seen that our economy has been improving, although it has not been improving as fast as what we would like. You know, the magic number when we take a look at gross domestic product, which is the broadest measure of economic activity, would put us at about a 2.5% growth rate. If we saw a 2.5% growth rate, we're generally able to absorb all of the new entrants into the labor force, and that tends to be that all is good with the world. So we're performing a little bit below that right now, but not too shabby in general. Well, this is because we are starting to see, though, these growth trends that are at least maintaining, even, you know, upticking a little bit. We're starting to see some upward pressure now on the interest rates. And obviously this is something that will greatly influence the housing market. The Federal Open Market Committee, or the Fed, we know is really trying to maintain some very accommodative monetary policy as of yet. They're keeping their target for interest rates very low. Now, our mortgage rates, our treasury bond rates are going to move a little more according to market forces as opposed to what the feds have set, but nonetheless, they tend to move slightly in tandem. And certainly what we're seeing with those mortgage rates now is that there has been a little upward pressure. You'll notice that in this chart, the forecast for the mortgage, the typical average mortgage rate was still sticking below 4%. That was by the National Association of Realtors, the National Association of Home Builders. We're starting to see a little more upward pressure on that, a little faster than perhaps what these forecasts were anticipating. Right now, we're seeing a mortgage rate closer to 4.4%. So definitely that upward pressure on those mortgage rates right now, which can also influence people's behavior in the marketplace. As consumers, we look at these mortgage rates as just one factor, of course, in decisions as to how we are choosing our housing. But in general, our consumers are a little bit happier than what we had been. We're starting to see those confidence levels begin to rise with our consumers. However, we are nowhere near back to where we had been prior to the recession. Consumers are still very cautious. They're still very nervous about what's been going on. But in general, it has been an upward trend, mainly because we're starting to get much better news when it comes to the employment markets. So we're starting to see unemployment come down here in the Littleton market. In the city of Littleton, we're actually seeing an unemployment rate right now about 7.1%, which is about a percentage point below where it had been, about a year ago. So that has been very good news. At the Metro Denver level, we're seeing unemployment rate now averaging right around 6.9%. Again, well below a percentage point from where it had been. So that certainly is helping our consumers to feel better. And then, of course, we are adding jobs. If you have that unemployment rate that is coming down, it generally means that we are adding workers in the marketplace. And I've been really making sure that people understand that 2013 is finally the year that we can quit talking about recession and recovery, and it's now about our new growth trend. So just to put this all in context here, in the Metro Denver region, we lost 68,000 jobs between 2009 and 2010. The following 2 years, 2011 and 2012, we gained back 62,000 of those jobs. So we were still at a deficit. It wasn't until 2013 that we have finally hit the point where all of those jobs that had been lost have been replaced, and we are now on this whole new growth trend. This has very important implications for the consumer psyche, for how our economy is doing, to know that we are finally at a point where we can put a lot of that behind us and really start looking forward to that whole new growth trend, that whole new growth cycle within the metro region. Yes, sir.
Patty, a couple of questions on that. We're talking about the job growth. We've also had a net immigration into the state from elsewhere.
Correct.
Given the population influx that has happened, are we at the employment levels on a percentage basis that we would have been?
Probably not yet. So we've recovered all of those jobs that have been lost, but have we gained enough jobs for our new inflow of folks? Probably still barely shy of that. But again, we will hit that point in 2013 of adding those back.
And on the sentiment level, you had the compression between the U.S. and the Rocky Mountain region.
Yes.
Historically, we've been more optimistic. What's happening to get us to that compression?
You know, this mountain region data includes Colorado. It also includes many of our neighboring states. So even though here in Colorado in general, I would say that consumer sentiment has been generally better, we still have some of our other states that do get into that mountain region, such as California and down into Arizona, that maybe they have not been quite as perky as we are. But it is very interesting because the mountain region has typically been one that has been much happier. We did see in some of this is an average figure for 2013, we did see in the most recent monthly data a big change once again, in that the mountain region did surge way ahead of the national level. So is it just that we're, you know, we're kind of, we're getting to that point. We haven't quite gotten back to our usual happy selves, but we're starting to see that the differential increase in just the recent months.
For those of us who don't have Phil's background, what does the range indicate? Like, I mean, we don't go down to 0 and we don't go up to 1 million, but the 40 to 140, what is that telling us?
This index level is based, this index is compiled by the conference board, and what they look at, through a survey methodology of households, they call these various households and they ask them questions like, are you feeling confident that you will still have your job next month? What about your vacation plans? Are you moving forward on your vacation plans? Big ticket item purchases. Do you plan to make any of these? And all of these responses are then indexed to a base year of 100. And I believe that this base year had been back in the 1990s, and I don't remember exactly. So it's all moving from a base year.
And so, because I was trying to interpret this, so when we were getting into the recession and people were, the savings rate was like minus something or other, that's reflecting people overreaching a bit.
Well,
I mean,
in this,
just as a sort of a different version, because people were so confident.
and that could very well be. I mean, this reflects people's, their expectations versus we would look at savings rate data or retail spending data to actually look at their actual behavior.
Yeah.
Do they tend to move in tandem? Yes.
Yeah, that's what yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay, let's look at some of the demographic influences. So we've kind of set the stage with what's going on overall in our economy. Let's take a look at some of our demographic influences, because certainly, as with residential real estate and all types of real estate, those markets are very localized. And so the types of influences, how your community is growing and developing, will certainly influence the real estate markets and the activity in the real estate markets that we tend to see. So one of the things that is very notable about the demographic data when we look at the city of Littleton is that Littleton does indeed have an older population than the Metro Denver average. Now, the reality is that as we look at many of these percentages, or by the various age cohorts, those older age cohorts, we are seeing that our population all across the Metro Denver region is indeed getting older. But comparing Littleton with the Arapahoe and Douglas counties, which is kind of another baseline that we introduce in the report along with the Metro Denver region, we see that that population 65 plus represents about 16% of Littleton's population compared to a little over 10% of the Metro Denver population. So certainly we tend to have a concentration of older individuals here in the city of Littleton. However, I should note that since 2007, we have actually started to see that group of 65 plus individuals decline as a percentage of the population. It's still growing in absolute numbers, but as a percentage of the population, it has declined a little bit. So we've actually gone from about 17% of the population in 2007 to now 16% in 2011. The flip side, the shift that happened was that 0 to 14 age group went from about 17% now to 18%. Or almost 19%. So we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in the population, and again, that's been occurring more since the 2008, 2009 type of time period and moving on into 2010. The main thing because we have seen a little more housing options for some of those younger families, younger individuals to move into here in the city of Littleton. So we're starting to see a little bit of shift in that. Also, another thing to note is Littleton's population has increased at a much slower rate than that of the entire Metro Denver region. So you have about roughly 43,000 individuals living here in the city of Littleton right now. That population has increased from 2003 to 2011 by just 2.4% in total over that what is that, an 8-year period of time. Comparatively, we have seen about a 1.5% increase per year in the Metro Denver population base. So again, the population in Littleton has been much more stable. The population throughout Metro Denver growing at a much faster pace. As I had mentioned, though, this aging of the population, this is not something unique to Littleton. This is happening all throughout the Metro Denver region. Think back to here in the Metro Denver area in the 1970s, the 1980s. We brought in all sorts of people. The inflow of new residents into the Metro Denver region was huge in those years, which left and attracted many of the baby boomers. And the baby boomers have generally stayed here. We're not going anywhere. We're remaining right here. And as we now age in place, we are seeing this whole shift, this whole combination of the age groups really going through some very dramatic shifts now in Metro Denver. Notice that it's that 55 to 64 year age group. That's the baby boomers right in there. That is the most rapidly growing population segment in Metro Denver, as is in the city of Littleton. And this is a trend that has definitely we've watched this coming. We've watched the baby boomers age in place. Notice here too, and this is a little more concerning, that when we take a look at the 25 to 34 year age group as well as the 35 to 44 year age group, I mean, these are our young professionals. And notice how we've actually lost that group of folks here in the city of Littleton and seen some minor growth within the Metro Denver region. That's one of the reasons why in many of the economic development organizations throughout the Metro Denver region, they're actually now starting to focus on what do we need to do to attract, to keep the young professionals within our marketplace, recognizing that that's our future. That's our future workforce right there. So just one of those things to consider. So how has this been, how has the changing demographics then been influencing the housing trends here? Well, certainly one of the things as we take a look at the housing stock here in Littleton, what we note is that the housing stock that exists here in Littleton does tend to be older than what we see throughout the rest of the Denver metropolitan area. Let me kind of give you let you get your bearings on this chart because there's a lot of information that is located on this. This shows the percentage of your total housing stock that was built in these various year brackets here. So if you were to take all of the red bars, which reflect the city of Littleton data, add those all across, that's 100%. So you can see that the bulk of Littleton's housing was developed in 1950, 1960, that 1970 decades, those various decades. Notice, however, in Douglas County, which is the yellow bar there, that the bulk of Douglas County's housing stock came on board within that whole 1990s decade. So indeed, if we kind of break this down into some of the numbers, what you see is that in Littleton, about 54% of your housing stock was built prior to 1980. Compared, now if we're looking at newer housing stock, many of these young professionals, they're, oftentimes looking for newer types of housing. So if indeed that is one of their preferences out there, if we look at the housing that was built in 1990 or later, we see that 76% of the housing stock in Douglas County was built in 1990 or later, compared to Littleton's, where 27% of the housing stock was built in 1990 or later. In terms of the types of housing that is available in Littleton compared to the Metro Denver region, this again is, each of these bars reflects 100% of the housing stock. We can see that in Douglas County, for example, that blue segment, that single-family detached market, represents a much greater share of their housing stock, for example, 78%, compared to Littleton, which is at 51%, which is much closer to that whole Metro Denver type of trend. But one of the trends that you do see is that Littleton does have a little more of the multifamily housing than what we have Metro Denver-wide. But of course, you're considering too, when light rail came on board here within the city of Littleton, you've been able to take advantage of some of the transit-oriented development and take advantage of some of those opportunities along the light rail versus other communities throughout Metro Denver are just now getting to that point. So indeed, when we take a look at construction activity and comparing it in Littleton versus Metro Denver, I mean, the first thing to note in Metro Denver, we've basically been building next to nothing all throughout the entire Metro Denver region. Our 30-year average of the number of housing units constructed throughout Metro Denver would put us at around 16,000 to 17,000 units per year. In 2013, we're going all out thinking we're going to hit 11,000 finally. You know, we have just been at historic low levels in terms of new construction all throughout the Metro Denver region. Looking at what's been going on in Littleton, again, this again goes very much hand in hand with what we have been seeing in terms of the transit lines and development along transit lines. We saw big surges in activity in 2009 and in 2010, again, mainly as a response, I believe, to some of that transit opportunities there. In 2009, we saw the development of the Alexan, or what is now called 5151 downtown Littleton, versus in 2011 or in 2010, opening in 2011 is of course their Aspen Grove. So obviously those were the big construction projects, the big opportunities, and thinking back to the population where we had saw very minimal change in Littleton's population, most all of the population growth in Littleton has, not surprisingly, occurred in coincident with the development of the new multifamily. Looking at the for sale market then, first of all, sales have been hot everywhere. We have seen the residential housing market just absolutely go crazy recently. And again, triggered by, remember when we talked about those mortgage rates have been incredibly low. You know, even as we've seen those rates, even to put them in perspective with that 4.4% mortgage rate that we are currently seeing, is still at historically low levels. And so that certainly has attracted people back into the marketplace. People have also been attracted back because they're feeling more confident in their opportunities for employment in the future. We're seeing job growth, seeing unemployment come down, all of this translating into this hot residential sales market. In general, Metro Denver everywhere has been up by about 20% over the year in terms of new sales activity. Littleton has also been a very strong marketplace, even though your sales rate has been only 12%, I'm sorry, still, nonetheless, it has just been a very strong marketplace. And because those sales have been strong, we're also seeing sales prices now that are, or home appreciation that is definitely much improved. Notice that for just about all of our markets, I don't have the 2007 data on here, I'm sorry, we are about back to the point where prior to the recession, our home prices are finally about back to where they had been prior to that recession, and that's really the case for all of the marketplaces. Notice that the average sales price in Littleton tends to track pretty closely with the Metro Denver average, and is indeed that just a little bit shy of the Metro Denver average price. That Metro Denver average price standing now at about $291,000, Littleton at about $285,000 in terms of that average price. Notice Douglas County, of course, Douglas County does have a concentration of some of those higher priced homes and all, and that's where we're seeing those that average housing price closer to in the 350,000 type of range. Comparing what are people looking for as they buy homes? Right now, we are certainly seeing that as has been the case for a long time, that kind of that middle of the market is that 200 to 300,000 price range. That's where about a third of the housing sales are focused right now. Notice that the type of homes that are being sold in Littleton really tracks very, very closely with the Metro Denver marketplace, with perhaps the exception that you are a little bit shy on those homes that are over the 500,000 mark compared to what we see at a Metro Denver average. Yes, sir.
Patty, home price is kind of an aggregation of a number of things that's there. Also, what tends to be indicative is what's the price per square foot of the home. Do you have any statistics on that? Because historically we've had, relative to the metro area, high price per square foot.
I don't have that data off the top of my head, but I do have that data series at the office, and I would be happy to follow up with that information. But you are right. I mean, you know, when we take a look at the size of the homes compared to the price, it is another, again, a very nice indicator. And I'm sorry, I don't know those trends off the top of my head.
So you'll send that?
I'll send that to Mike.
And
Sure.
you'll send it to all. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
No, but I will comment because I do a lot of walking. I bump into the people, and then they say, "I'm looking for a house, you know, whatever," and they just about say before I can even get to a house to put a bid on it, it's sold. Oh. And then other people are saying, "Man, I'd love to live here." Somebody where I bought my car, somebody at the courthouse, somebody else. I'd love to live here, but the price per square foot is too much for me. I get a lot more house in Douglas County.
Interesting.
2 or 3 people.
Okay. I will definitely take a look at that. I don't have the data. You know, I mean, just in general, you know, we are hearing the stories all throughout the metro region of people that are, you know, they're having to put that bid in the minute they look at the house, and now we're starting to see those bids coming in at higher than posted prices even. Just a very hot housing market right now. One of the good news pieces that I did see, you know, we have been suffering from very low inventory. I mean, first of all, because we've been building next to nothing, but also because, you know, those existing homeowners were not putting their home on the market, and we're finally starting to see those inventory numbers or those numbers of homes on the market starting to increase. So it is possible that people are finally feeling like, okay, you know, I'm ready to put my home on the market. Maybe they were afraid they couldn't get the money out of the home that they wanted, or maybe they just weren't quite, you know, didn't want to, for whatever reason, they weren't confident in doing that, and we're starting to see a little bit of shift in that right now. Okay. The other facet, of course, of the housing market would be the apartment market, and I know you're going to hear a lot more about that, but let me just give a very brief overview. Notice that in the city of Littleton, that vacancy rate had spiked there in 2009, 2010. Of course, that was when all of those apartments were just coming online there with the Alexan property and the Aspen Grove property. Notice how quickly that vacancy rate in those apartments, though, came back down, how quickly those units were absorbed within the marketplace. I would certainly, I mean, this type of data indicates to me that the Littleton apartment market is a very strong market that has absorbed those units very quickly. We've seen that vacancy come down and some very solid performance in the typical lease rate. And I am curious myself where we have seen that average lease rate did come down in the first quarter of 2013 compared to where we had been. I'm hoping that the Apartment Association can shed light on that for us, so thank you.
I think you got your data from the first quarter. We've got information.
And I don't have the.
Actually, the 2.4% now for this second quarter, but
Yes.
add that in.
Yes, so we'll hear much more about that. So as I have kind of discussed throughout this, you know, the transit influence on growth patterns in Littleton, I think, has been significant, and certainly we're starting to see this in more and more parts of the Metro Denver region. You know, we are seeing kind of this whole transit premium, certainly. Different studies have looked at what the levels of this premium, how much more are rents or even sale prices if we have for sale products located in the area, and different studies peg it at anywhere from 10 to 20% premium. Obviously, multifamily is what we would expect would be the predominant type of housing product around our transit stations, and representing roughly 85% of the type of housing that does get, that is incorporated around a transit district. One of the things, too, that has been certainly the thorn in everyone's side, I think, is how the construction defects legislation has been influencing the development of for-sale product around some of our transit stations. I mean, that is what many people feel is really lacking within our marketplace, is trying to get some of that for-sale, that whether it be condominiums, the townhome products, or whatever, in close proximity to our transit stations. And I think that remains an issue, not just around our transit, but indeed throughout that whole entire throughout the entire state when it comes to some of that single-family attached type of projects. Yes.
I chair the Dr. Cog committee that's studying the construction defects legislation. We expect our report to be finalized in October.
In October now, okay.
It'll be finalized, released to the committee the very end of September, but it probably won't become public until the board meeting in October.
And that's the work of the EPS is
That's
working
correct.
on,
That's
right?
correct.
I'm very anxious. Any preview you can give us of that? Or?
Not prepared tonight. It's very encouraging, though.
Okay, good. So looking ahead, you know, this, as I had mentioned, this is not a market feasibility study. You know, we have not put any type of numbers to future development or that type of thing. But there are certainly some trends that I at least want to highlight as we think about the direction of housing within Littleton and indeed throughout the entire Metro Denver marketplace. I mean, first of all, multifamily rental demand remains very hot yet. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that, but there is still definitely a trend of interest in rental properties as opposed to home ownership. Now, some of that may be due to, even though we have low interest rates, there have still been issues of people actually qualifying for those mortgages. In order to get a mortgage, you know, all of the credit necessary is much tighter than what it had been. So there are certainly some folks that have been not able to move into the ownership market. The aging of the baby boomers. As I get older, I'm thinking, you know, I want a smaller house. I don't want to have to do all that maintenance. So maybe, you know, to either look at rental properties, or would be great to be able to own some type of lower maintenance, such as a condo type of property or some such thing. And I think many of the baby boomers are really looking at this from a lifestyle perspective of, where do I want to be? And maybe I want to be on a transit line so I can hop on rail and get downtown for cultural activities. I can be close to an urban, suburban area and take advantage of cultural activities. Attracting that young worker, that's also one of the trends. Again, many of our young workers, you know, we're hearing more and more data saying, you know, that our young workers don't want to own a home just yet. You know, they've seen what happened with this whole housing bust and thinking, you know, I don't want to go there. But I still believe that it is still part of that American dream, and they will eventually reach that point. And we'll reach a point, too, when rental rates are such that it starts looking more attractive economically to own as opposed to rent. But for now, some of our younger workers are still a little shy of the ownership market. Yes, sir.
Patty, I remember when the point at which somebody made a break into home ownership was oftentimes at the condominium townhouse level because the rental had increased on a monthly basis. With a reasonable mortgage rate, they could get into a condominium or a townhouse. They could get into a condominium or a townhouse at a reasonable rate, and it could balance off from what they were paying at rent. And they could look at, even if it was flat, there was some return. The construction defects issue, I think, has taken that momentum and just crushed it. Have you looked real strongly at that as being the reason why then the next step, single-family home ownership, seems to be such the leap that it is now? I think it's very significant that what the legislature did was they really put a hurt on young families moving ahead.
Right. We did not look at that specifically in this report. Maybe that will be something that the Dr. report will address. But I agree. There are very few move-up types of options for those younger workers, the younger families out there. Good point.
I comment too, though. In my neighborhood watch group, we only have 17 houses. So we have a little T-bone shape group. And so out of those 17 houses, 2 couples moved in before they got married. They picked where they wanted to live, knowing they wanted to have children and be close to the school that was nearby. Mm-hmm. And that happened during the recession. I suspect maybe families helped them with a down payment or something. And now those 2 couples now have one child each. So some people are looking ahead. There's right around the corner from my neighborhood watch group is a young man who graduated from CSU, I think, bought his house a couple of years ago, knowing that he wants eventually to get married and be in that area. And so he invested there. I mean, it surprised me. Not married, no partner living with him, but he knew that was a good place to be putting some money where he is. So I think some people are being young people are being very astute, being careful with their money, putting it into the house, and looking ahead.
Perfect. And, and I think that probably those individuals are probably some of the lucky ones. I mean, we have seen that during this whole recessionary period, when we lost those 68,000 jobs and all, it really we had like new college grads that just were not able to find work. So it could be, I think people are still playing a lot of catch up. And that we will see this reinvestment once again in single family, but we haven't really seen it just yet.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I mean, one of the things I think is, at least as I've my sampling is a little bit limited in folks that I know, but when folks tend to look for that single family home, it's with their second child. And that often is a dynamic that changes a little bit. But what you don't have in some of your statistics was within the last 3 months, go for a sample of 2 neighbors, one on one side, one on the other side. The population has gone from 3 to 9, and so it's gone up, and school-age children have gone from 0 to 2, but will go up to 5 very shortly. So it's been interesting to kind of watch the dynamics and just the neighborhoods.
Sure. And I guess just the very last point I would make about the whole continued expansion of light rail throughout the Metro Denver region. Again, I think that Littleton has definitely been ahead of the curve, ahead of being able to take advantage of all that rail has to offer, obviously, since your rail line had opened, year 2000, and many others are just still chomping at the bit to get that. So I think that many of the housing trends that we have seen here in Littleton are a precursor to what we're going to be seeing as other communities too start to take advantage of some of the opportunities with transit. So with that,
Go ahead, Peggy.
So a question in the text part rather than this, in the housing trends text part. And if I have the page, I think it's page 19. End of the first paragraph. Single-family detached and attached units comprise one of the smallest percentages of TOD housing, about 2.5%. But again, in the neighborhood where I live, it's quite walkable. I live a mile from the downtown light rail. But there are a lot of people who are walking, and they want the detached houses. I mean, it's not just on my block that I've seen young people move in. A lot of people are wanting to come, and they will walk to the light rail. So I'm wondering with that percentage, if there isn't also, if that's not an indicator, we might need to have more single-family detached options.
sure. And keep in mind that this, is using that definition of transit-oriented development of within that half-mile radius. So it could be that you're, and not that that's the right definition, but that's
a little finger at the balloon or something or other
Right.
there.
Because
not, there are people who want something other than that, and some of them have quite a bit of money to spend.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line with any community is a diversity of housing.
Right.
Is so critical. Absolutely, because you if you want to attract a diversity of population, you need to have a diversity of housing options, because not everybody wants that single family detached, not everybody wants to rent. So that whole diversity of housing becomes really key.
You've talked, and per the exec summary, and you mentioned it up here, you've got a lot of our single-family housing stock was built from the 60s to the 80s. You mentioned you've got some younger families. You're starting to see the youngest or the earlier portions of the demographics trend starting to grow, and yet housing prices are going up, which puts younger families in a conundrum, to Phil's point, where the dollar per square foot might be cost prohibitive. Certainly for, if you're having to pay a relatively higher price for a 60s or 70s constructed house, where you're probably is a strong word, but you may want to then invest to do some upgrades. When you see this in other communities, or based on what you've seen broadly, either in the metro or in the outstate areas, how do other communities sort of successfully approach that type of an issue from the standpoint of, are there things the cities or the municipalities can do to partner with people to encourage transitioning some of these houses, to encourage the turnovers of the families, so that you get some more younger families in, which support the schools, so forth and so on?
Terrific question. I have no idea. I'm sorry, but in much of the work we do, we have not necessarily looked at what some of the other communities are doing to incentivize, those types of housing changes.
Okay.
One community that I do know that had gone through that, and I remember having conversations way back when with the city of Englewood, had also really looked at, how to try to change that type of the housing stock and all. But
Okay,
I'm sorry, don't know that.
okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Are you,
I'm done.
thank you very much. Great
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you. Thank you. You don't have to tell me. Well, I appreciate you doing the hard work and all the numbers, because that's not us. Anyway. All right, well, I am Nancy Burke. I'm with the Apartment Association of Metro Denver, so thanks for having us here today. A lot of you have already heard what we've said. We've added a few fun things to keep you awake, and I want to make sure that this is an exciting presentation for you tonight. So here we go. We don't have a PowerPoint because we just kind of ran out of time, but we do have some handouts later afterwards that we like to give to all of you, just about economic input into communities and just kind of the trends that we're seeing in multifamily. So you'll be getting that later. So basically, we're here to talk about the recent trends and new dynamics of multifamily. It's been interesting. When I first started with the Apartment Association about 5 years ago, we were kind of the stepchild in the real estate umbrella. We're down here, realtors, home builders, all up here, and I'm just like, okay, highest vacancy rates we've seen nationally in 30 years. We all had to take pay cuts. It's like, this isn't fun. But Obama had his $8,000 tax credit to buy a single-family home at the time. We'd go back to D.C., just kind of tongue-in-cheek, we'd go, hey, Congressman, where's our incentive? But it's kind of like, be careful what you ask for, because all of a sudden, here comes the Dodd-Frank Act. And it put increased regulations on financial institutions, which made it more difficult for people to go and get the 30-year mortgage. Aside from that, corporate instability was kind of setting the tone. And a lot of folks were worried about, am I going to have a job? Do I need to move to another market to continue working? And so we saw people that really wanted flexibility, and they were choosing to rent. Aside from that, too, we look at demographic shifts, and we're observing, like Patty said, seniors. There's 78 million seniors out there. Now, not all of them are going to do this, but there's a chunk and a trend that we're seeing that's unique, and that is they don't want the home maintenance, and they do want the walkable communities, and they do look to downsize. So we're seeing some of those folks really focused on that now. And another demographic change we're seeing are recent college graduates. They get out of school, and the average student loan debt is right around $28,000. So they want the flexibility, too, when they're looking for their career path to be able to, go to that market where that job offer comes. So they're seeking to rent. And Tatiana is going to talk a little bit more about that, that generation in just a little bit. But with all these factors in play, by 2015, not too far off, we are expecting 7 million new renter households nationally, which is a chunk. In addition to that, Colorado is among the fastest of growing states in the nation. We're at number 6. Job growth is up. A lot of times vacancy rates and the job growth charts are parallel. You can just really watch them. They kind of follow along. Colorado is rebounding quickly. And according to the Denver Metro Chamber, Denver's population is expected to increase to over 3.2 million people by 2020. So we have a whole bunch of folks moving in, and we have a whole bunch of different factors at play of people that are really focused on renting. So I'd also like to point out that about half the homes, office buildings, and retail locations that we need by 2030 don't exist today. We need about 60 million new housing units by 2030. So today, vacancies are at an all-time low. The demand for renting is high. The tenant of today is longer term, less transient, because now their apartment is their home.
According to Time magazine, Generation Yers, which are also known as the Echo Boom generation or the new millennials, are not interested in home ownership or owning a car. Nicholas Mulhand, an analyst with the firm of Frost & Sullivan in London, told the Detroit News that owning a car is thought to be unnecessary by Generation Y, and they are moving away from ownership to renting. The business model of the future is to rent. Today, it's not cool to own a car or a home. Multifamily benefits local communities in numerous ways. The average multifamily resident generates 40% fewer motor vehicle trips. Single-family residents generate an average of 10 vehicle trips per weekday compared to apartment residents, which generate 7 trips. According to RTD, 40% of residents are willing to pay more for an apartment community located near light rail stations. Less car on the road saves money on infrastructure and wear and tear, as well as to work to reduce the number of car accidents on the road. Multifamily housing requires less public infrastructure, including roads, gas, sewer, water, and electric lines. The average multifamily household consumes $1,600 in public services compared to $2,300 for a single-family unit. Apartments help stabilize a municipality's economy. Nationally, the apartment industry spent more than $14.8 billion in construction in 2009, and this year was considered the lowest multifamily completions on record, with just 130,000 new units added nationally. The spending created an economic contribution of over $42 billion and supported more than 324,000 total jobs. The apartment industry nationally operates $68.9 billion to operate and lease the country's 19.3 million apartments. This operation spending created more than $182 billion in economic contribution, supporting more than 2.3 million jobs nationally. Having a balanced housing portfolio helps attract businesses. Municipalities need to attract new employers, and employers need workers. One of the main reasons why companies relocate isn't taxes or over-regulation, but shortage of housing for their workers. There is a connection between jobs and housing. When municipalities do not have significant housing for their workers, the businesses end up leaving. Without ample, diverse, select housing, workers and jobs leave a community, and municipalities lose out on consumer spending and tax revenue. Patty did a great job going over first quarter vacancy rates in her report, but the most recent vacancy rates for the second quarter of 2013 show Littleton's vacancy rate at an all-time low of 2.4%. Compare that to the metro average of 4.2%. 10 years ago, it was a dramatically different picture, as we talked about earlier. In 2003, the vacancy rate in Littleton was 16.5%, compared to the metro average of 13.1%. Labor and workforce issues lead to companies leaving. A great example of this is the Lands Holding Resource LLC firm in Colorado Springs, which is a $500 million land investment firm. Last week, they announced that they were moving their headquarters to Denver. The reason why was because they could not attract enough young professionals, and they lacked the affordable housing needed to expand their company in Colorado Springs. So why are tech companies leaving sunny California for Chicago? And why are Midwest companies relocating to Houston? It's to access the young professionals of Generation Y. They want convenient, walkable communities that put residents closer to work, friends, shopping, and entertainment. 70% of apartment residents spend money on goods and services within their own local community. Apartment residents in 2011 spent a whopping $421.5 billion on goods and services nationally. That's a lot of sales tax revenue.
My turn. It's a lot of numbers. Thanks for handling that.
Where, does that say where they actually spent? Does that exclude or include online sales?
Mainly, they spend in local communities. The numbers we've seen data-wise are much lower for online sales in
Yeah,
apartment
no, I
communities.
just wondered if that number included the online. Thank you.
All right, so I'm just going to wrap up here. With the recent shifts in housing over the past 2 years, we hope that this new recent information will assist in creating workable policy that will help enhance the vitality of Littleton. Littleton is unique, and it's a sought-after community. The choice is yours as you move forward in discussing the factors involved in creating a balanced housing portfolio. But I would like to add the key to success is a willingness to change old ideas and add new solutions to the mix, which includes updating the conventional wisdom about apartments. In my perspective, the City of Littleton is moving in the right direction. The fact that you are seeking additional housing options to obtain a balanced housing portfolio is key. The fact that you are working with well-respected developers that produce quality product is key. Today's developers work with communities to enhance neighborhoods and cities. It's not the poor built boxes of the 1960s anymore. A good developer works with local governments and communities to produce apartments to not only meet residents' demands, but also to enhance the neighborhood and fit aesthetically within the community. I do have handouts now, Sean. If you want to pass those around, that'd be great. If any of you have any questions, Sean is our local government affairs lobbyist. He's here to help us out tonight. Tatiana does local government affairs with me, and we're happy to take any questions. One thing, if any of you don't get these brochures, if there's not enough, please feel free to go to weareapartments.org. That's from our National Apartment Association, and they just put together a lot of this information that we went over tonight is online there. So I encourage you to go there and just take a gander. But yes.
I do have a question, because you're not the only ones that tell us that people don't want to have cars anymore and they don't want to necessarily own anymore. I have 2 recent college graduates over the past 4 or 5 years, and they, as well as their friends, because I do ask them, they all have a car, they all can't wait to get a new car, and they all can't wait to buy a house.
See, I'm a car person. And, you know,
Yeah.
this is just
so
in
where's
general.
this information coming from that people don't want cars anymore?
The
This
study,
is Colorado, after all.
there are multiple studies on that. One was put out recently by Time Magazine, another was on CNN. Part of the reason is actually the increased student loan debt, which Nancy referenced earlier, which is if you have about $28,000 in student loan debt, it's going to delay potentially getting a car or a house in a timely manner.
But it may delay, but doesn't mean they don't want it.
Eventually, some kids may want it, but a lot
But
of...
again, the example that I'm giving, they're all recent graduates, these kids I'm talking.
Well, there's going to be exceptions to everything that we're saying, but these are the trends that we're seeing. You know, you see the go cars, the shared cars out there. Now, I'm seeing tons of those anymore, which I want my own car, but, you know, some people...
Those, by the way. But, and I'm in the housing industry, as you know, and the affordable housing primarily. I don't know any of those people that don't want a car. I don't know any of those people that don't want to own a home.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was wondering, where is this information coming from?
Yeah.
New York?
No, it's national, national studies, and it's the new
what about
generation.
Denver and area here?
Denver too. Yeah, absolutely.
I just don't see it actual. I hear numbers. I just don't.
You know,
I
I
hear the
don't-
justification for a building. You know,
And I hear what you're saying too. I think, you know, in the suburbs, it's not so prevalent. When you're downtown Denver, you see a lot of these folks renting. We're seeing new multifamily high-rises going in. We're seeing them with solar, composting, community gardens. We're seeing the dog runs. We're seeing the bike, you know, wash stations and prep up your bike. So, and it's interesting to me too. This really threw me off. Back in the olden days, whatever you want to say, 1980, 1990, you know, when people would develop these multifamily, you'd have a 2-car slot for yourself. You know, 2 cars. Everyone has 2 cars at least, right? Now some of the developers downtown in the walkable communities are looking at 0.5 car spaces. So the trend is real.
In fact, we just lost an employee in our office because she didn't like making the commute from downtown Denver to her office and found a job within walking distance from her apartment. So we are seeing that shift. It's just with a certain segment of the population.
Again, my experience is just the opposite. I mean, people are telling me this is happening.
Yeah.
But again, when I talk to folks, it just isn't true.
You're the exception.
Everybody I talk to.
And there's others out there too. So these are just trends. It doesn't mean that everybody's doing it, but these are the trends that we're seeing, and we're seeing more and more and more of this. So we just wanted to report that to you, that we're seeing these trends out there. So, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, though. Yes.
Tatiana, did I understand you to say that your research is showing that there are less vehicle miles traveled for rentals than there are other products out there?
Well, renters typically buy goods and services within their local community. Partly that's because renters choose to walk around more than single-family homeowners choose to, which is the great thing about the TODs. As we saw from Patty's report, you guys have 2 very active TOD stations in Littleton, which allow easy access to educational routes, as well as accessing downtown. So that's just the trends we're seeing, is that apartment residents do tend to spend within their local communities.
And Jerry, was it you that said that you'll never take RTD because, what was that?
I want everybody to take RT.
Because you drive. That's what
Because I
that's what the joke was. Yeah. I'll never forget that. That's hilarious. So there's Jerry on the road again. Take RTD. Yeah, maybe you should do
By myself.
you should contact RTD and see if you can be the poster child. So, yeah, it's interesting. And, you know, what's kind of cool about Denver and the whole metro area is that we do have a Dr. Cog working on the RTD system. And, you know, you can pretty much get anywhere anymore, and they keep expanding it. And pretty soon you really don't have to have a car. You know, I told this to my dad because he's a car dealer. He's like, no, you know, but, you know, you don't want to hear it, but that is what's happening. And it depends on the age group, too, because I'm just learning about this new Generation Y, and I'm like, I don't see it that way, but they do. So it's just different perspectives. You know, I'll never be that person. I'll always have a car. But, yeah, go ahead.
Just a point for Jerry. I have 2 graduates that don't have cars and don't have homes and have jobs, so that's the good part. I'm not looking for you to
Thank you, Phil, for that clarification.
The dynamic that I see changing somewhat, at least in some of my experience, is the profile of folks that live in apartments. I understand about folks spending in their community that's there. What I'm interested in is someone coming up with the statistics that talk about how folks are invested or involved or participating in their community, not just spending money, but are actually on some of those softer things. And I'm not looking for you to answer that question now because I'm not sure where some of the studies are in that, but that's, you know, as I've seen some of the folks that I come in contact that are involved in the rental, they're interested in how do I get involved and
Absolutely.
participate as opposed to what I would say is kind of this little piece of a traditional view that I might have and others might have, which is folks that live in apartments are transitory. They're just, they're, you know.
No, it's true. If you Google social equity, there's a whole bunch of stuff on that. But it is, there are studies out there that say if you live within a community where you can really, you know, get to know your neighbors, that you're likely to stay there longer and get more involved in the community. So whether that's the actual apartment building or it's the community itself, I think that definitely happens.
And we have some studies showing that if you live in an apartment community, you're 22% more likely to know your neighbors due to the density, the fact that you're living closer to these neighbors compared to 300 single-family homes spread all over. But renters are very similar to the general population. Single-family home owners tend to go to church about 54%. Renters tend to attend church services 44%. So very closely aligned with the community and very similar to the community as a whole.
Yes.
Patty had a graph that talked about housing stock by type, so just representing the numbers on the graph. So Littleton's got about 40% of the housing stock is multifamily. Arapahoe County, call it 35, Denver 30. You guys, at the end, Nancy, you were talking about balance of housing stock, which I think, you know, I think is a good objective. It's ensconced in some of our priorities in our code and so forth, so our comp plans. Where's, in your view of what's out there and what you see in terms of healthy communities where there's a mix, where do you see the break point?
You know, a rule of thumb in general across America is probably about 35% we're seeing in multifamily. But I must add to that, that once you have your TODs in place, that percentage goes up, because that's what people really want. They want to be able to hop on that train, get to downtown, and come back. And so you're going to see more multifamily in those areas. So that'll definitely go up. And with the increase of people that are coming on board that want to rent, that number's going to go even higher.
And with construction defect laws, a lot of people who would traditionally buy the condominiums cannot buy those. So they instead buy rent upscale units instead.
Thanks.
Yep.
Nancy, in Littleton, we have a large number of multifamily housing that was built in the 60s or in the 70s. What is the future for these buildings and for these locations based on the demand? Are they going to be bypassed by this for newer, better, more modern, or is there still a place for them, and will they want to reinvest in those or possibly even change them in some way?
That's a good question, and we're seeing all kinds of things to answer that. It depends on what the property owner wants to do. A lot of times they'll just keep them and keep upkeep, and that's one thing. In Denver, we're seeing some of those kind of places torn down, and they're rebuilding. So, I think there's such a demand right now for multifamily that sometimes that's the case. They're just going to go tear it down and build up something new that's more community and upscale. So it's all over the board, and I can't really answer that because I don't know who owns the property that you're talking about, and it'd be different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I have a question that kind of takes off of what Hattie had said earlier, or had actually in our report. I don't think she actually touched on the household incomes. I was shocked. I have always understood Littleton's household income to be that it was very high. But the report indicates that the household income is lower than Arapahoe County, Douglas County, and Metro Denver, and substantially. I mean, 55, almost 56,000 in Littleton, 58 in Arapahoe, 98, almost 99 in Douglas, and Metro is like 60 and a half. So based on this, the surge in the rental market, and I understand that there's a number of different demographics that it's attracting. There's the Y, is that what you call them, the Ys?
Generation Y.
Generation Y. I missed something between baby boomers and Y. X.
Gen
X.
X.
XYZs are coming.
Yeah,
Zs
whatever.
are coming. So what, and then downsizers, so what do you guys see in terms of household income? Because they're renting because they may have trouble buying. They're renting because they have, with particularly the past.
And that's a percentage of them, absolutely.
Yeah. And they're renting because they have a large student loan debt, which takes their balance book, your bank balance into a tizzy. So what are you looking at there? I mean, ideally, of course, I think we would want to have housing that would raise that income level, because we are a sales tax-based community.
You bet.
So.
Well, and that's the beauty of TOD. You're going to get a whole different, dynamic coming down here that, is going to be going to Denver. Maybe they're working there, but they're going to come back on the train, and then they're going to come down here to eat. But yeah, you're going to see different. I don't know what the price point is for some of the new builds going up for rent, but right now I think the metro average is right over $1,000 a month for an apartment. So that's something to think about too. But it's going to be all over the board depending on what they're moving into. But I think that you do have an opportunity with the TODs to get some folks down here that have higher income levels that'll help raise that percentage. Definitely.
And with an apartment building, a few years ago, we saw, people who would get kind of the fake interest loans where they didn't exactly put in their full documents about how much money they were making or flubbed it. You can't do that in an apartment community. I'm a renter, and they check your pay stubs. They make sure that before they even show you the unit that you're qualified to do that. And in my apartment community, which is not too far from here, I mean, we have such a wide mix of people. We have military veterans, we have professors from Regis University, we have local government people like myself. And so it really is a new nation out there. It's not the same, transient kids or, the college party students anymore. People are raising their kids there, building a future there. And a lot of times for the younger generation, they're still trying to figure out exactly the right career fit for them as well as the right community fit to eventually buy a house and raise their children there.
Great. Peggy?
Yeah, one other question. I had it in my iPad, but I wasn't tracking. And when Debbie was talking about the income, can you get us the per capita income also?
Isn't that in your report, or did I see something?
It's household, but I was in. Because, in response, that part of the low income is, not speaking against anybody, is our immigrant population probably, and the apartments, and then seniors who love it here, and seniors don't tend to have as much as they did when they were working. Most people. So, but it would be interesting to see the per capita, I think.
Yeah, so, yeah, she's your girl on that one. You bet, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
So, anything
Okay.
else?
Any other questions? Great. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Good to see you guys again. Okay, we'll take a quick 5-minute break before we start our next session. Okay.
Probably is on this.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Look who we found in the hall.
It almost makes you want to keep the doors closed, doesn't it?
We took a break. No, welcome to the Historic Preservation Board. Thank you so much for coming, and we're running a few minutes late, like 25. Thank you for waiting. And you guys are here to talk to us about an incentive program.
Great.
And Chuck, you want to?
You bet. Thanks, Mayor and Council. First, thank you for having us here this evening. I'm Chuck Reed, Chair of the Historic Preservation Board. And if we could, I'd like to start just with the Historic Preservation Board briefly introducing themselves. I will note that Vice Chairman Margie Clout is in France at the moment, and so unable to join us tonight.
Rough dude.
Great.
Good evening, Greg LaRoche.
Paul Kastner.
Dan Murphy.
Pam Grove. Catherine McMurray.
I'd also like to note that I invited former board member Bill Hopping to come tonight because of his work on the incentives which we are reporting on. By way of a quick recap, Council asked us back in February to do a little additional work on a proposal regarding incentives. This was a follow-up to a joint effort by the Historic Preservation and Planning Boards, where we spent a lot of time interviewing businesses and property owners regarding their needs for growth in the historic district and taking a look at the existing incentives. In the packet that was provided for tonight, beginning on page 3, is a list of the current economic incentives. It's not my intent to walk through those this evening, but for you to have those for reference, and certainly questions if you'd like to ask about those. When we reported back to Council in February, you asked us at that time to go back and articulate some of the specific recommendations regarding some of the incentives. And so working with the staff, the Historic Preservation Board did just that. And I'd like to look at page 2 of the handout. Page 2 starts with the recommendations. Following the work that was done primarily by, again, Board Member Hopping and Andrew Graham from the Planning Commission, the Historic Preservation Board is recommending that 5 additional incentives be added to those that were already offered by the city. The first 3, the concept sketches and historic photos, the dedicated opt-in account, and the tenant improvements, were all determined after review by both the staff and the Historic Preservation Board to fall within the purview of the existing ordinance and code. And so those were items that actually we integrated into the grant funding that we looked at for 2013. The concept sketches and historic photos were an option or an incentive that at the time of opting into the district that the city would present to the property owner conceptual architectural sketches and historic photos of the property to give them an idea about what their property did look like or again could look like. Dedicating funds into the opt-in account. Once someone actually makes a decision to join into the district, that the Historic Preservation Board would set aside a to-be-determined amount of the grant funding that would specifically be for newly opt-in individuals or businesses or properties. And that actually will be part of the grant program for 2014. All those, of course, subject to the grant availability and the application process. The third recommendation that, again, we simply implemented because of the interpretation of the code would expand the use of grant funds to include tenant improvements as long as those improvements were related to health, safety, environmental issues, and maintained the historic preservation details. Before jumping to the other 2, I'd ask the Historic Preservation Board or Mr. Hopping if there's anything people would like to add in terms of the incentives that were identified and really implemented. Questions for the council on that? Looks like several.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chuck, on your number 2 on the dedicated opt-in account, if I'm understanding what that would do, does that create a fund that can be used specifically for that building? And if that's the case, would that remove part of the funding that's available as a grant to other buildings in the district?
In a broad sense, yes. The thought there, so let's move to maybe a hypothetical in terms of the grant funding. The last couple of years, council has generously provided a $50,000, and assuming that is the floor moving forward, the thought is that the board would choose an amount, and just for illustrative purposes, I'm going to say $25,000 that would be set aside for new businesses that opt in. And the grant program would be structured such that of that $50,000, $25,000 designated for new businesses opting in, $25,000 for existing businesses in the district as a specific encouragement for new buildings opting in. Now, who those are and what those would be, we don't know yet because we don't know what the applications would be, how they're going to stack against other applications, or what some of the existing building needs might be. But that's generally the concept about how that would look. Does that make sense in terms of the question? Okay, great question.
So I was going to ask about that too. So suppose then, if we did have the 50 and you did that each year, suppose 1 year, one person opts in, but the next year, 6 people opt in. So they wouldn't be getting the same access, would they, from what you just said?
No, they wouldn't. And I think that's, I don't know how you deal necessarily with that equity issue. I don't think we could necessarily plan for that. And as I like to say, that would be a really good problem to have if we had 6 buildings opt in.
Well, I mean, eventually you wouldn't have any left to opt in, but it might be
That's the goal.
something to rethink how you balance that.
Good point. Bill, did you want to add to that? I'm just.
Bill, you're going to need to come to a mic.
Here. That specific point came from some of the people who are already in the district who suggested that would entice people in, and the idea is it would be kind of a negotiation. Somebody would say, look, I'd really like to come in, but I've got, let's say, windows. I'd like to do windows, and would be able to get a grant for, say, $10,000, and we could say we can put that forward. And then that's why it says to be determined. We could determine individually based on what business was coming in if there was grant money available and help entice them in that way. So it would be pretty fluid and it'd really be up to the board to decide. But that came right from the Main Street owners. So.
Peggy, just to maybe add to that and answer your question specifically, is that it really is no different than what we have now with regards to people applying for the grant funding, where some years we might have more people than others, so it won't be equal just based on how many people are applying and how much money there is. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
So-
very, very similar to that.
So maybe I think you've done at least a couple of times in the past, sometimes somebody gets some money to do a portion this year and then may be able to do the rest of something the following year. So that might be some way of doing that too. I just was thinking about the equity piece, right? And
It's a great question. We really grappled hard with how that would look.
Which one?
How about you, Councilmember Stallman? How about you? Go Bruce. And if I say go Bruce, how would you? Councilmember Stallman.
Well, he's good, Bruce. He's the white jacket, and then bad Bruce has
We saw it's the good Bruce, bad Bruce.
I'm not going there. I'm just Councilmember Stallman.
Match.
Bad to the bone. I like the concept sketches one. I think is great. I think that's one that's been kicked around for a long time. Was there, to me, that back in the day, that seemed to be something that really excited the property owners, just to conceptualize what could be done, because if they get a regular general contractor, they may just do one thing that the GC knows how to do, as opposed to, hey, here's a lot of stuff you should consider. I wanted to ask you about the tenant improvements piece. this would appear to extend beyond just facades. Is that accurate, and is that your intent?
It is accurate, and it is the intent. The thought there, again, just really focuses on the accessibility, health, safety, environmental issues. This is a new area. We have not gone into the buildings before, but again, in terms of expanding the incentives, this was something, again, that we heard over and over from the Main Street business owners as part of the interviews, and really, I think was met with general excitement in terms of what we heard back from businesses this year. We did not have any inside grant improvements that were submitted, but I do think we'll have some of those next year.
Okay. Okay, good. And I'll go ahead, Phil. I'll jump back in later.
Because it's on the tenant improvement, which is,
okay. Sorry.
I'll use the nice word historically. The board has not gotten involved in imposing any kind of requirements to internal side. How do you move into a tenant improvement without saying, okay, it needs to have some criteria? And you may not have all the answers to that, but seeing as how that's kind of a new territory, I'd like to maybe hear what some of your current thinking is.
One of the key points in terms of the tenant improvements is that it rehabilitates original architectural details, and that's a key component.
I mean, and recognize historically you haven't gone inside, so this kind of changes a little bit of some of the scope, and I guess hearing more about that.
I think a part of that is, and I think that that's true, and in terms of the original focus, what we were charged with was expanding the incentives. And I think that this certainly answers that expansion question.
It certainly gets there, and I like the fact that you used a very recent facade improvement incentive program for your picture.
Bruce.
Thank you. On the last page, you have a chart, a table, that talks a little bit about the balancing of these different recommended incentives. And you do say, and I want to say it, and then I want to talk about it for a moment. When we talk about the dedicated opt-in account, which seems to me to be a great idea, but there's always unintended consequences, you do address and say, well received by property owners, and a portion of the current grant fund would apply. I just want to say that again, that the unintended consequence for me might be that someone who is a current property owner and had plans might find their plans are pushed back by now this limited amount of fund available to them because of the incentive program. And I worry that we seem to have a balance right now. Things are going pretty good, and I like the idea of an opt-in incentive, but I'm worried about that unintended consequence.
I think that's a really good point, and we'll take that back as we've identified some of the specific details there. I will go back to that this was really a part and parcel of the whole interview process of the business owners. And what actually was of almost more paramount importance related to that issue was the feedback that we received from businesses and property owners who are in the district and actually had a concern about businesses that were not, and the possibility of their ability to not follow the historic guidelines and what they might do in terms of their building that would rip the fabric of what downtown looks like. And so that issue is an important one, but it was secondary in terms of the interviews.
Bruce.
Chuck, I guess just sort of glancing back through your summary, these are incremental incentives. There's always a lot of discussion about the parking issue and the parking exemption, which has sort of been a traditional carrot or maybe one of the larger carrots. Is there any conversation about substituting in some of the new incentives versus, and maybe pulling back some of the old ones or upgrading them as opposed to, for example, parking? I mean, has there been any discussion, or did you guys kick around the idea of say, well, if we did this, maybe what we do is, take parking off the table given some of the constraints?
No, we did not take parking off the table at all, and that continues to be a very popular incentive and still a very good problem to have to solve.
Okay.
And I hope we have more problems with that. That's a good problem to have.
Okay.
And so no, we didn't include any discussion about things that could be removed.
So these then, the 5 you're talking about then are incremental in order to entice more people, make it more a sweetener, if you will.
That's exactly right.
Okay, gotcha.
There were 2 incentives that were discussed.
Chuck, can I?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I just have a quick question on the tenant improvements. I think you said earlier, these are exterior improvements?
These would be allowed to be interior.
They would be, okay. When you talk about accessibility, is that the ADA accessibility you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess on the asbestos abatement, I mean, I'm looking at the grant program of $25,000, putting even the smallest business to ADA, that can, you know, I'm sure that this is just helping them afford those costs. What's the assurance that, or you know, that you give them this grant money and that they can afford to make those changes, and that it actually does happen within a specific amount of time? Because some of this, and specifically since you're off, you know, the idea is to offer it to new ones, would be the sooner they get this done, then the sooner they get up and running. And I'm aware of a business down there who spent a fortune getting ADA up and running, and actually ended up probably delaying their opening by about a month or so. And that, you know, that's time's money. So do you have a plan for that, or am I jumping ahead of your?
I think the plan for that, such as it is, Mayor, is that in terms of the first issue, let's talk about first completion of project. Projects are paid when they're completed and funds are reimbursed. And so the project has to be completed in order for people to get paid. The second issue in terms of cost, clearly, depending on the type of accessibility changes that are needed or any asbestos abatement, the grant fund would just be a small portion of that. One of the specific incentives in the existing incentives, which I'll point out as number D, which is that the board shall attempt to identify and implement other economic incentives for historic properties. Just as an example, there are federal programs for internal asbestos abatement as part of environmental brownfield issues. And if an applicant had the support of the Historic Preservation Board, the city of Inglewood, or I'm sorry, of Littleton, does a good, the city of Littleton, that helps a grant application that they would have in terms of for those funds. And so that's how that's structured.
Okay. And then just another quick question on that. Do you see the primary market on this as being the shop owner or the building owner?
That's a really, really good question. One of the things kind of that we've really been shifting a lot of our conversation to after the identification of the incentives in the grant program this year has been really a push at trying to communicate the existing incentives as they are today with either the building owner or the business owner. And we're literally working parcel by parcel through those lists to identify relationships and key contacts, because for each one of the businesses or parcels, the answer might be the property owner or the tenant or a property manager or all three. And it really just is dependent on each one of the parcels. We're in that process right now of identifying those.
Well, if I can just throw in my 2 cents, I would strongly encourage a focus on the property owner. I think one of the things that helps with create a thriving downtown is to have a diverse and active and interesting collection of retailers. And if we have property owners who are not making the types of improvements that should and could be made on their properties, and they're expecting the retailers to come in and do that, we lose a lot of opportunity there. We have recently had handfuls of people walking away, and some attractive shops, some things that would be it would really enhance the community. But it's too cumbersome to come into a building that needs some of those upgrades when the owner won't do it, and they expect the shop owner to do it. And I think having the incentive for the shop owner is good, but I think it's going to be overall more beneficial for the community, or specifically for the economics of downtown, if they can, the owners get these places ready for move-in, and boom, these guys get in faster, quicker, sooner, and start the cash register ringing, and then and that makes it a lot hotter property too. My 2 cents. Go ahead.
That's great.
No, finish your thing. You don't have to applaud.
Oh, come on.
Okay.
The other two recommendations, really, the Historic Preservation Board is asking for council direction and/or action on. The first recommendation, number 4, is consideration of a sales tax rebate. And in this case, the city would rebate sales tax generated by any property within the district for a set amount of time or dollar amount who chooses to opt in. So this is someone who's not in, chooses to opt in, and creates sales tax, and that's just some type of a share-back formula. That would need council consideration and action. And we would ask that you include that as part of your economic development discussions.
So to that point, then, that would be more for the shop owner directly, obviously. I mean,
it would be because the sales tax is paid by them, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Could become part of a lease negotiation as well.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point, because, I mean, at some point, there's a relationship between the lessee and the lessor, and it's more attractive economically if there's an incentive.
Okay. Just broadly, when the board had that conversation, what we really recognize is the property owner's interest is certainly a longer-term interest than a tenant. Not to say that tenant doesn't have a long-term view, but it's a slightly different view. So,
the other thing to point out is the incentives we're talking about were health, safety, and welfare, which will definitely benefit the tenant, but those improvements stay with the building ultimately.
Yeah.
So really, in the long run, the benefit is to the building owner. Initially to the tenant, but in the long run to the building owner.
Yeah.
You're going to elaborate on number 5 also?
On which one, Jerry?
Number 5.
Yes, and number 5, again, the Historic Preservation Board is asking council to consider, and again, in terms of expansion, that to use the existing grant program as a floor and a baseline, and to tie potential increases to that incentive to revenue increases that are specifically generated by the historic district. And that information is trackable. We've seen that information. Again, it's targeted specifically at that expansion opportunity. So again, it's something we'd like to request that you all take a look at, and that in terms of your economic development programs you consider as well. Can we answer questions or about the last two?
On number 5 again, I mean, I can read what it says there, but tell me more about really mechanically, how does this happen?
Okay, so again, hypothetical round numbers. The historic district in the city's geographic code generates somewhere around $700,000 a year in sales tax. If there was growth in the sales tax from that area that went to $800,000.
As a whole?
As a whole, yes. That some portion of that be plugged back into the grant program just as a...
City allocated.
Yes, that's correct, Jerry.
Its own type of grant.
Yes. That would be additional enhancement, additional funding.
Yeah, thank you.
Peggy?
It's going to sound negative, I guess it is, on number 4. It seems to me we have higher turnover than I'd like. So if we're rebating sales tax and the business doesn't really survive very long, even if it survives a year or two, if we're rebating and they go out of business because maybe they didn't have a good business plan or rent increases or whatever, then it doesn't seem to add to that big figure you just mentioned.
Sure.
Not very well.
I don't think that's a negative question at all. I think it's a real-world question. And I would imagine that in the city's discussion in terms of economic development incentives, you've dealt with that same issue. And I don't have an answer for you tonight because we certainly, as a historic preservation board, did not go to the level of detail on 4 or 5 that we went to on 1, 2, and 3 in terms of implementation. And it'd be really fun to hear what your economic development experts would come back and recommend on that problem.
Kind of related to what Peggy just said, do we have any statistics that tells us what the turnover rate is right now for the ones who have opted in? That would sort of address what I think what Peggy's thinking too. It gives it maybe a more fuzzy.
Yeah, this is when I asked Dennis if he's in the room. Dennis, do you know?
You may need to get to the mic so other folks can hear your answer here.
It's a little hard to track.
Dennis, you may need a microphone here.
Yeah, the question was, are we able to track the turnover within the district, those who are opted in, those who are not? And at this point, we're not. I'm not aware of those figures. I can talk to folks in the Economic Development Office and see if they have a way of tracking that. It's a little tough. But we can certainly look at kind of anecdotal and as much information as we can provide. They try and keep track of who's in where at any given point, but it's a little tough.
I mean, we're being told that people don't want cars and don't want to buy houses anymore, but I would think that would be tougher to determine factually than.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking turnover rate is something we can determine just by going down there and surveying
Sure,
and asking.
absolutely. Yeah.
Because I think the answer, to get to Peggy's question, I think that's an excellent question. Excellent question. Did you hear that?
Glenn, why don't you come on over? Mike, are you going to talk tonight, or can?
Yeah, you can.
One of the things we can track are
Thanks for taking it to me. I appreciate it.
is we track building permits, so we can actually see when we issue new tenant improvements. So if a new business comes in and they make substantial changes to the interior, exterior, we would know that. We would have a physical number for that.
Give you sort of a clue at least.
But if they've been vacant for a year before the new one comes in, you wouldn't know that necessarily.
That'd be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Well, how many property owners are down there? I mean, we could get the info.
29, I believe, something.
We have 48 properties that we look at.
Individual owners?
Get over here.
Well,
Take a knee.
Don't sit down, kneel down.
I know, I will. I'll be back and
in
forth.
addition to building permit numbers, you'd also have sales tax licenses.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that, but that in
Could
combination.
be an
with-
office.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, with an office tenant, they won't necessarily make changes to the interior of the building, as you know, they come and go.
But if we're talking about a sales tax rebate, if it's an office without any retail operation, I'm not sure it's as important in this kind of a program.
True.
And in general, or at least our position has been that we have some sort of base as described in 5, but also that should exist in 4. Yes, I would be willing to take a look at staff in providing some analysis and how those might be structured and whether they could be tracked and dealt with in a way that's not complicated for the business to participate in, and pros and cons on whether it's property owner or tenant.
Dennis, were you going to add something to your comment there?
Just I think people ask how many property owners there are. We know that there are 48 properties, and the ownership goes back and forth between them. They're joint. Of the 48, we have 28 of those who are actually opted into the district, so it's about 58% are opted in at this point.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And council, I would just suggest that unless somebody has any concern or any huge objection to it, that we would ask staff to bring back an analysis of 4 and 5 for us to review at another study session.
4 and 5?
Mm-hmm.
What about the others?
They can do those on their own.
Yeah, they don't require a council vote. But 4 and 5, of course, they're tax related. So I would say that at the very least, we need to flush that out quite a bit more.
So number 3 is related to the grants only that we're not a part of.
Current grant. Bruce?
And I just ask that when staff looks at the sales tax rebate, they do it from a position of understanding that the goal ultimately is to increase sales tax to the city. So by whatever incentives or baselines or business types or whatever, it will be a challenge, but the goal is always to, at the end of the run, be in a better condition as far as city sales tax generated revenue than it was when you started. Because I think otherwise we're getting into picking winners and losers in the marketplace, and that's not really our goal. Our goal is to have additional revenue.
Both of them are incremental.
Good point, good point.
Jim?
Or as Bruce would say, point noted.
Spot on. Jim?
I would like to see the staff's analysis done, although I do think that the final decision needs to be part of the budget discussions. And once we get through that in September, we still would have time to put forth whatever ordinances need to be done in order to put this into effect before the first of the year.
Agreed. And I would just, well, I'm, I want to see all the numbers put on this. What I like about tying in sales tax is that, and this is a problem that a number of downtowns are having throughout the metropolitan area, particularly the older downtowns, where you have the charm and you have the wonderful and the people come down for it, but that really high value sales tax generator has a non-sales tax charging entity in there. And so it's really prime real estate that we're not getting the benefit from. Some downtowns are forcing them to the second floor. And we have discussed what do we do about that and do we do anything, and I think we've just kind of let that, we did have a small conversation on it and it didn't go anywhere, but I think that this type of thing helps incent the types of businesses we want also, particularly in some of those really key locations, which has got my attention. Any other questions?
I just wanted to make one comment to be sure that it was understood that there is a finite period of time that can be assigned to these tax incentives, so it's not an open-ended thing.
Yeah.
So if, whoever is reviewing, staff reviewing these issues would take that into consideration pretty, heavily, because we don't intend for it to be an open-ended thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that too. There's a deadline or sunset.
Well, and it's absolutely thrilling, Mayor, to hear that thought, because certainly on the very first page of the proposal, it lists the board's mission, which is to work to preserve the built environment that gives that unique sense of place and identity, and to encourage reinvestment and compatible growth that enhances Littleton's vitality, the economic vitality. And so we really are about that. We recognize that, and I think that one of the other purposes of the report was to really take a look at the effectiveness of the grant program, and you've heard us several times over the last few years talk about the sales tax collections, again, based on the geography. The downtown growth has been phenomenal. It was 67% during a very difficult time period. The return on investment for the council program with that is less than 2.5 years. There's a very good return on your investment, and so it's growing. You're staying ahead of that. We have not seen the 2012 geographic breakout data in terms of sales tax collections. That's not the only thing that we're about. Not only is it sales tax, but you are really helping preserve that unique sense of place. We know, and one of the things that the Historic Preservation Board has talked about over the last few months is helping to try and define what our role is, if any, as you're looking at land use decisions that involve preservation issues. And we really do stand ready in any way that we can help with those discussions. We feel like we have some background and expertise there, and can really serve as an opportunity both for applicants and residents to understand better about the role of the Preservation Board. So we'd be happy to play that role.
Great, thank you so much. Peggy?
Yeah, so one more thing about the sales tax rebate, and I don't know if this may be something for you all and/or the staff, but some places don't do rebates until somebody has survived a while, right? So it becomes a reward for having a good business plan, a good management, all of that. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that you might want to share with staff, who then would share with us or whatever.
Sure, we'd be happy to take that back and workshop that a little bit at the board, because it's a good point.
Bruce and then Phil.
I just was going to suggest, I know you guys do the regular, what's the phrase? Certificate of appropriateness. Yeah, when people come down to either opt in or to make changes or whatnot, and that's oftentimes what the focus of the board is, but I think this is nice work. I think you guys are getting creative here. You're out thinking through broader issues, and I just offer up compliments because I think it's a nice effort on your part to get out there and add value this way, so appreciate it.
I was going to add on the sales tax rebate, because we've had some discussion on whether it's tenant or property owner. From your survey, you may have some input to staff on some of those pluses and minuses. Going to Debbie's point about tenant selection may be enhanced if it's going to property owner, and you may see some building improvements or such that may pay more attention to what's the type of business that's there, because there's some sharing in where the property owner may be.
Jerry.
On the increased collections of taxes that they mentioned, I think that's a great thing. It'd be good, and I don't know if Glenn or Mike or somebody would come up with that information as far as by establishment within, what would you say, 28? How are they affecting the sales tax? I mean, for instance, is it just Merle's that has really increased their sales and maybe they're not a part of, or where are the increases coming? And it would just help me to understand it a little bit better. Thank you.
Can I make a quick observation regarding that?
You bet.
So a tide raises all boats. So it's difficult to separate out the things that are part of the district and things that aren't. There was a comment made earlier about looking at short-term tax consequences for revenue. And I would ask that you take a long-term approach to that. And there might be an investment piece when it comes to total cost of ownership for getting and maximizing sales tax revenue. It might be that the very first year, maybe the first 2 years of such a plan is going to cost more. But overall, is it going to give us more revenue?
Right.
And the reason why I say that is because right now we're looking at 28 of 48. What would it be if it was 48 of 48? And you need to be able to compare apples to oranges in that way. So even though it might reduce tax revenue in that example initially, overall, is it going to increase tax revenue once everyone opts in? Because that's the intent of these 5 strategic options.
Jim.
I agree with you, but there's one little thing that still bothers me. When we talk about 48 property owners, that is everybody in the area. There's some of them not eligible to belong to the district under your criteria because they have not been in existence, the building's not been in existence long enough period of time. So they're not eligible to, under your criteria, to be in the historic.
Will be.
They will eventually, as they get older, Jerry. But right now,
As they get older, as they age.
Well, maybe we can ask for clarification on this, but I believe everyone that's part of that 48 has the option of being in the district. I think the question to which the item to which you're talking is whether or not they're a contributing or non-contributing structure. So there is a period of significance in which they would be considered as a contributing structure. But take the tavern as an example. That's something that is opted in, but that's not part of the period of significance. So I believe all 48, correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis, are eligible to be in the district.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And echoing what Mayor Pro Tem Solomon said, that thank you for going outside the box, thinking creatively. I think that's, well, I know that's exactly what our intention was when we pushed you a bit to kind of stretch it a little bit. It's, you know, one of the things that we're seeing more and more, and we will continue to see, is the competitiveness amongst these downtowns. And we've got a number of cities all over the metropolitan area that are working their tails off to create these types of places. And the competition for the merchants and the attractiveness and then ultimately the competition for the shoppers is going to become even more vigorous as these communities start to get these downtowns built out. So definitely we have a head start, but we don't want to lose our lead. So I think that being creative and coming up with new, fresh ideas that will attract and be appealing to some of the new, fresh thinking that's out there, amongst merchants, and hopefully soon to be shop owner or property owners too, is right on track with where we need to keep pace. So thank you so much. Thanks for all your work. Thanks for coming tonight. And if there's no other questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda. Give you guys a chance to exit. Thank you. Good job.
Good job, all of you. Thank you.
What's today? Or stay? Oh, yeah, you can stay and watch the rest. Leaving. It's Glenn's.
Actually, no, it was kind of slow started, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ida?
Yeah, 'cause you usually have a good turnout.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I saw you on the list.
Thank you.
You know, I think that hiatus in there for 10 years.
Thank you.
He was whipping out good question and all of this stuff to that side, but he would never keep that. What am I? Even I was giving that out.
The thing is, I think we're waiting here.
How's it feeling? Yeah. They're afraid of us. They're afraid of us, yeah.
Oh, there's a big water there.
Why is, yeah, that's.
I put that big thing of water there so that people wouldn't trip over that thing.
My knee hasn't recovered. My knees
I didn't
haven't
want to
recovered.
get
Where's your team?
They're right behind me, so to speak.
One or the other.
There's got to be a better.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's not you.
It's me.
It's Charlie.
No, we tried to have them put plugs in the middle.
Hey, when they do the new carpet,
Maybe
That's what they need to do.
Yeah.
There needs to be,
Yeah, and that was not an authorization for the expenditure for the new carpet either, though.
Just an idea. I'll ask him about it.
You got to dig up the concrete.
I know, that's why.
Actually, it's a whole lot easier if the carpet's
That's
not
why
there.
we need a new building.
And they gave me long extension cords, and I was like, and these aren't even them, the ones they gave me are just craziness.
That's just not going to work.
I know, it's just for tonight.
Well, we can also get those things that,
I have
plastic things that cover it, so.
There's got to be something.
Those little rubber thingies?
Drop them down.
Yeah, you could just drop it down.
It's easier to do.
Why do people have them all hanging down covered with?
Okay, Glenn,
All right, Mayor.
item
Council.
number 3.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd like to introduce Al Calusi with Clip Architecture and Planning, and soon coming through that door is Tim Schlichting of Littleton Development Partners. But a couple of folks that know our community and are very involved in the Rocky Mountain Real Estate Challenge that occurs every year, and it's a student project, but I have to say that this is much more than a student project. This competition, here he is.
Okay.
I just started, Tim. So as I mentioned in our staff report, this pits 2 teams of graduate students from the real estate schools of the University of Denver and University of Colorado. They take a real detailed look at a potential development site somewhere in the Denver region. In fact, last year it was in Boulder, so I don't think they're necessarily limited to the Denver area. Al has asked me a couple of times, I think what they'd really like to do is more of a TOD type project utilizing the RTD property. And in this case, they're interested in perhaps the subject being our mineral station and the RTD property there. And how do we redevelop that parking lot into something much more for the community? And as I mentioned, what happens is these student teams get teamed up with architects from the area, so they get professional help creating that vision. They work with city staff as far as make sure that it meets our zoning requirements, our comprehensive plan, and then they crunch the numbers to see if it actually is a good project, and they're judged by, is it a national team or are they local development?
And local developers.
Right, and ultimately get the crown of the winners. So I was able to attend last year. It was on a site in Boulder. Pretty impressive. I think what I was impressed with is at that final banquet, and that happens in May, 600 professionals in the commercial real estate office development community are there kind of seeing our community or whatever the subject of the project is. So without any more, I'll turn it over to Tim or Al. They've both been involved in the past and certainly know it much better than I do.
Well, that's a great introduction, and thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to just kind of talk a little bit of what the challenge is all about, because for so many people, it's kind of a story worth telling and kind of getting out there. Many times when I've approached this group before, it's been kind of representing projects, which I have a love for and a passion for, but this time I'm wearing a different hat, and that is representing NAIOP, which is the National Association of Industrial Office Parks. Now there's...
Could you introduce yourself, both of you, so I could get your last name?
Sure. It's Al Calusi, spelled C-O-L-U-S-S-Y.
And I'm Tim Schlichting. Last name is S-C-H-L-I-C-H-T-I-N-G. And I'm with Littleton Capital Partners, is the name of our company. And we're both members of NIAP, as Al just mentioned, which is a professional association.
This is now going into its 12th year, just to give you just a quick little background as far as what this is all about and what it has done historically, because we heard about this quite some time ago, and Tim and I have been involved pretty much in that past 12 years in a variety of functions. But if you can imagine the idea in terms of taking the kind of the last graduating class from the University of Colorado and the last graduating class from the University of Denver, in terms of saying, okay, you guys have been through undergraduate school, many times you've been working, now you've come back for graduate school, and this is your opportunity to test every sort of thing that you have learned in terms of real estate, land use planning, in terms of the whole plethora of everything from finance all the way through. So the concept behind this, and that is literally kind of something like the old GE College Bowl, and that is you pit the two teams against one another. But the idea in terms of that you really kind of give them the support services in terms of the real estate industry, the real estate community as a whole, to really be able to kind of show, to give them the support. So what they're doing is more than just an academic exercise. It's really kind of hitting the ground running with the idea of applying everything that they've learned in school and making sure that if they come up with a concept, which that's their challenge, is to be able to kind of come through and show that they've done their homework regarding a market analysis, a financial analysis, public-private financing, the idea in terms of potential uses. And with that, what we try to do with, which we are able to do, is with each school in their graduating class, is that they typically have about 3 to 4 teams within each school. So what we do in essence is we solicit and secure pro bono services from architectural firms for one architectural firm for each student team. So what we put together in terms of a lay of the land, in terms of here's a problem statement, you are charged as the developer for this particular project, or whether you wear the hat of a real estate advisor, developer, or whatever we want to be able to craft. But your charge is in essence to be able to show sound planning as well as appropriate financial results for a concept, whatever that is. So typically we put together a concept package and a background package that has comprehensive plans. information about the market, information about all the criteria of the area. In this case, it would be surrounding the mineral station. We supply them with a fair amount of resources in terms of real estate expertise, planning and development and urban design expertise, as well as the idea of being able to kind of go more comprehensively in terms of like public-private financing. So with each of those student teams, then goes off with their design team, and they work on a project in terms of their own making. They do their homework, and each of those schools then has an internal judging to where those 3 or 4 teams then are, out of that judging, they pick one particular student team. So then at that point in time, the students have about another 3 weeks to kind of tune up and fine-tune their particular proposals, and then they go head-to-head with a group of about a dozen judges, and those judges are hand-selected in terms of basically a who's who of real estate professionals in the Denver metro area, and they're scrutinized in terms of giving a presentation the day of, in terms of an enclosed session where they are grilled by the judges in terms of how the project is to perform, what's their concept, is it rational, and really kind of pelting them with a lot of good questions. Then they have a brief break, and that evening then it's typically held at the Marriott downtown, where we have literally last year we had about 650 people.
Yes, it was well over 600.
So it has now grown over the last 12 years to the largest real estate industry kind of event of the year. And with that, it's able to, in essence, take any kind of project or any sponsor and really put them appropriately on the radar in terms of the entire real estate community, regardless of what your role and what that might be. And then that evening, the 2 students' teams basically get up in front of the audience and give a full-blown presentation in terms of what their concept is and the rationale, and then the audience, in essence, are able to kind of critique that. And at the end of that evening, both from the day judging as well as the evening presentation, the judges, in essence, make the award in terms of Team A or Team B. And it's pretty interesting because, in essence, with the various sponsors that we've had in times past, and that's been, for example, like the City of Denver, City of Boulder last year, City of Lakewood. We've had private developers in Aurora. We've had the Gates TOD station. And so a variety of kind of interesting kind of sites that we really feel are appropriately suited for the students. But in essence, what it really helps is, in essence, the sponsor getting hundreds and hundreds of hours of, in essence, consulting time. So if you can imagine, if you had a piece of property, which one we've talked about with Glenn would be the mineral station RTD property, if you could have 7 design teams, in essence, almost doing a design competition for it, on top of that, 7 market analysis, and then the idea in terms of several financial performance that, in essence, are really scrutinized by the financial community, you're able to just get a ton of information in terms of really help form the vision and help test the comprehensive plan as far as what should you be doing in terms of as stewards of this property. Now, many times on these projects in past years, we've had joint sponsorship. RTD has been a very kind of consistent contributor in terms of the work that we've done. And most recently, they worked with us on the Denver Coliseum as well as the 9 Mile station out there at Aurora in 225.
Before that, they did Market Street Station downtown.
That entire city block.
In the 12 years, I think RTD has been a sponsor, a joint sponsor of, that's 3 off the top of my head. I know we're probably missing 1 or 2.
Yeah, probably 1 or 2.
So they've been very involved.
And then the dynamics in terms of the sponsorship, in terms of whether it's the public sector or private sector, really doesn't matter. But like, for example, last year for the City of Boulder, which was, I wanted to try to get the site up in Boulder to balance between DU and CU in terms of who's on whose turf. But we're able to secure in terms of this, the City of Boulder was a partial financial contributor. The Downtown Denver Improvement Association also contributed, and then 2 private sector developers, the WW Reynolds Company and Tebow. So in essence, you had 4 sponsorships that all came together in terms of a downtown city block of Boulder to be able to really take a good hard look at it in terms of being able to kind of say, all right, what is forward-thinking, appropriate planning as well as design, and what is that vision for what this site could be? And in essence, that is discussed with the Planning Commission. Many members of City Council were there, as well as the mayor spoke from Boulder last year. And all in all, the idea in terms of just a tremendous kind of a fleshing out or kind of idea generation, both what I call in terms of the youthful vigor of kind of a graduate design student, but also being grounded by the financial scrutiny that they get from the judges. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic. It's worth kind of contributing the time and energy that Tim and I do. In essence, I've really become enmeshed where year one, I started out as an architectural resource for one of the student teams and then have provided a variety of roles. Tim and I have both been judges in terms of times past, so it's very beneficial to kind of really see what the skill set out there, and I'll tell you, it's very impressive as far as what's coming out of both schools. We also have debrief sessions with the administrative and academic staff of both graduate school programs to try to fine-tune what they're teaching as well as what they might be kind of needing to round out their programs on an ongoing basis. Yes? I have a question. Then, now, as far as the location you're talking about, which is already developed, right?
Well,
we're talking Aspen Grove, the light rail.
Yeah, and our thought was that the parking lot to the south of Aspen Grove is probably an underutilized asset in the sense that if they're, not to presuppose the solution here, but if that could be developed with commercial uses and then the displaced parking could be accommodated with a structure somewhere, it's interesting to us for several reasons. It just seems like it's a prime site for development, but the way that the Aspen Grove Shopping Center really turns its back on that site to the south, and then to also be adjacent to the what was formerly called Alta Aspen Grove, but I think it's been renamed since it traded hands. But the apartments, so you've got residential uses, retail uses. There seems to want to be something, a higher and better use perhaps with that parking lot that I think is in total is 7-8 acres.
So you're including the dirt parking lot, which I can't stand.
Everything that's owned by RTD that's not
there, right?
that's not
say yes.
Yes. That's not a dedicated open space would be would presumably be available for.
Because on the picture that we have, it does not include that dirt parking lot.
Yes, it does. It's a little one.
It's the little piece.
On the
west of the roadway.
left. On your left.
Oh, that's where 7-Eleven is, right? Oh, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, the corner piece.
Yes, and I've got that at almost 17.5 acres between those two combined. So that's a very sizable something that the students could really sink their teeth into and come up with something pretty
Thanks,
special.
Tim. Appreciate it. Coming back also to the RTD piece is that Kent Bagley, which I'm assuming many of you know, has been involved with previous years with the challenge, has also been a big supporter from RTD's standpoint in terms of bringing them to the table. And we preconceived the idea that there is multiple sponsors for this site because there's multiple ownerships and multiple interest in the direct context of the site as a whole. Yes, sir.
Sponsorship. You've talked about it being shared, and there's this nice little line that says there is a price for admission.
There is.
I imagine at some point in time we'll hear what that might be, so that's one. History with regard the award winners in that and what's been done with the property and how that relates or not, if you could touch on that. And then something like this, which is it's on an unfinished line for RTD because the southwest line actually extends down into Highlands Ranch. Does that become part of the consideration as everything goes through? So those would be three. So start with price, history, and
Just jump right in. What it is $40,000. Kind of fair and simple, right straightforward. So I'll put that on the table for you guys.
And that's the total?
That's the total price tag.
But you said you would share, so you're going to pay 35 and we pay 5?
I was thinking about 37. On a serious note, though, that's why we have found in years past the idea of multiple sponsorships, such as, for example, last year with the City of Boulder, the Planning Department put in $20,000, Downtown Boulder Associate put in 10, and the two developers put in 5 and 10, or either a $5,000 or $10,000 amount for that. So I want to make sure that you guys understand kind of the benefits for that, because in essence, sometimes looking at any kind of budget, regardless of what public group you're with, $40,000 is a lot of money. But I think that what I have seen and can most distinctly kind of report is that the number of man hours that goes into this sort of thing several times over in terms of being able to get value. The second question that you had in terms of, okay, tangible results as an
Before we move on, can I
Sure.
just I've spoken to Margie Munoz, who's the property manager with DDR of the shopping center. I've also spoken to the new ownership of the property is a company called Berkshire Property of formerly the Alta apartment project. They were very interested, and there was a marketing person that she put me in touch with that I kind of didn't really pursue until we'd had this conversation, because I didn't want to get too far down the road with any of these other parties until, even knew if you all would be excited about it. And I think RTD is certainly a stakeholder here as the owner. So, I don't know how that 40 divides up, but I think what the example that Al provided with Boulder last year, I think there's, I can't speak for these other groups, but we would certainly intend to go and have a similar conversation with them. They would benefit from more development at this location, I would believe, and that they're all big national companies that probably have some amount of marketing, PR type dollars that they could, contribute. So that would be our goal would be to try to spread that around amongst at least those four groups, and we won't know until we ask, but that's where we'd start.
And that's why we try to present it to you like that, we've had several years of experience with joint sponsorships from that standpoint. Sorry. No, that's quite right. In terms of your second question, in terms of tangible results, is that about 4 years ago, we worked with the City and County of Denver and RTD for the redevelopment of the Denver Coliseum. As you know, it's a little bit of a historic landmark. It has a ton of history in terms of Denver performing arts and that sort of thing, theaters and arenas. And as a result of the proposal by the DU team, they wanted to create an agricultural extension to CSU because of the directly adjacent to the National Western Stock Show, because there's a lot of moving pieces at that point in time. And I believe earlier this spring that CSU was announcing kind of more of a formalization with the stock show in terms of putting that all into place on the north side, thank you, of I-70, because in essence, the light rail station goes underneath the elevated portion of I-70. You can walk from the Coliseum under I-70 there, and there's a beautiful piece of land in terms of the river north that's all happening in that portion of town. So once again, there's kind of all this crossover that I see happening. And the reason that I've kind of knocked on Glenn's door some time back is because I see kind of what I call the dynamic within Littleton. I really like what's going on in Littleton, and not to do just development for development's sake. So the idea here is not necessarily in terms of saying, okay, you've got whether you call it an underutilized or a piece of property that RTD owns, but I think RTD is understanding the need for, I think, more kind of visionary planning with what they do with their real estate assets. So the idea in terms of the end result doesn't mean just a bunch of high density. I don't want you to kind of get that impression. It's mostly in terms of making sure that the students do their homework with what the community really is all about, what the community needs are, and how to approach appropriate planning for a particular piece of property. And I know that there's a huge sensitivity within Littleton in terms of doing the right thing, whether it's in the downtown core, whether it's in other developments such as the Marathon Oil property, which I'm all too familiar with.
Yes, you are.
Yes. So you see these kind of sort of things that are happening there. And so I think in terms of applying good planning principles and good real estate principles is kind of a win-win for everybody involved. Now, I'm trying to remember your third question.
It was, to what extent does it flow in that this is actually, it's currently a terminus station, but it's not ultimately designed for that. It's a mid-station.
Working personally with RTD myself as a client, I know that in terms of that they're pretty dynamic with their station area plans, as well as working with like local municipalities, whether it's the city of Denver and or Lakewood on the west line. I've seen a lot of that kind of dynamic happen. So I would assume the idea that this isn't necessarily an end stop with a continuation on around. I think the idea of the planning principles, whether it's on T-Rex line or on the southwest line or on the west line, are pretty much all the same, that each station has its own personality and its own development needs, and there's no canned solution for any TOD. And the idea in terms of that it automatically comes prepackaged with I need so much of product A, B, and C, I think is a misnomer. So I think the idea of the continuation maybe actually brings more shoppers from Highlands Ranch into Aspen Grove to be able to, get on the train and be able to come to Aspen Grove for the new theater and that kind of dining experience. So that should probably be folded into the students' program in terms of have they done their homework to know what 5 years out, 10 years out really looks like for the
On the
dynamics.
20-year out where the extension goes into Lone Tree.
Is it that far out?
You're dreaming.
Yeah. Okay, Peggy, then Bruce, then Bruce. Peggy.
You're done, Bill.
I was wondering about other folks that might want to be involved in some way, whether South Suburban Parks and Rec might want to be involved in some way, even though this wouldn't be a park per se, but maybe there's some interface. And I don't know about the South Metro Chamber, just thinking on those. Then I'm also wondering, even though it's a separate property, about the property on the other corner.
Glenn, is that the property that's to the south of Mineral?
Yeah, that'd be the Enzer property. And we actually talked about including that, and I think the feeling was, I mean, as far as the actual design, but that was just too much land. But, I mean, we'll certainly make a call and see if they would be interested in
I just figured while we're exploring.
Good luck with that one.
We have learned over time, though, there's kind of some right sizing of properties. One of the experiences that I want to say it's about 5 years ago, we did the High Point property out near DIA, which was like 3,400 acres, privately owned. It's the closest privately owned property to DIA. And it became more of a little bit of a master planning concept for the students rather than getting into the nitty-gritties of the real estate finance. Both schools have a heavy focus towards real estate finance. So the idea in terms of public-private partnerships and how anything is kind of structured, we try to get it to a right size, as well as I think the idea of something that they can get their arms around. Yep. And it seems to be like the idea of somewhere between 5 to 20 acres is kind of the sweet spot.
Okay.
So the idea in terms of the Wonderland property, my gut feeling tells me I know that there's a big need there. I also wear an Urban Land Institute hat, and that's another story, because I know you've been down that road with them. But the idea in terms of what I see here from the kind of the property, the potential how to make even Aspen Grove more dynamic, how to, in essence, making sure that the open space along the South Platte River, in terms of have an opportunity to tap that, and it should be tapped even a little bit more. So I really like your idea in terms of South Suburban. So good stuff as far as, I think, rounding out the program piece. And that's what we would do if, in fact, if we were to go ahead with you, is work for the next, between, let's say, about the 1st of October through Thanksgiving on a problem statement, as well as the background material that we would want to present to the students as a whole.
What's your deadline to submit if we would be doing this?
We're trying to get this pretty well under wraps by Labor Day. And there are several other sponsors, much like that we're talking with you at the same time. And we keep a running list as far as fairly numerous, but right now that there are several that are starting to percolate to the top. That's the opposite direction. Basically to rise a little bit to the top as far as what seems to make sense from a good sponsor this year.
And just a little more back on the schedule. The reason for the kind of the Labor Day deadline is that it then takes us a good part of the fall to really put all the materials together and refine the case statement. And then that's usually provided to the schools so that when they get back, it's a semester-long program. So right when they return from the holiday break, we have a kickoff event, and then they have that entire semester, and then the final competition is in May. But it really does take us most of the fall to really get all the materials pulled together and make sure that that's ready and waiting for them when they come back from.
And this is for the two schools?
Yes, so they both.
But do you use on the quarter system?
I can't really speak to how they reconcile kind of their academic year, but I know that they both get the materials at the same time, and they have the same deadline because the competition's on the same night. And whether one's on a semester and one's on quarters or trimesters, I can't really speak to that. But
we get those two to align as far as the idea of putting up all the student teams with the various architectural resources and then doing a big kickoff.
Thank you.
And if I could just expand a little bit on the timing too about why I think this site is a particularly good one. Sometimes when we approach owners or potential sponsors, and I just had this phone call today, in fact, they'll say it's kind of too late because if their planning is already too baked, if you will, they'll kind of say, we're not really at the stage in this. We're past the stage rather where kind of some good fresh thinking is really going to is really of value to us. We're headed down a path. And sometimes in the case of something like as large as High Point or something, it's too early in the sense that to really be thinking about a 10, 20, 30-year horizon is just so speculative. I mean, we could go into another recession. Who knows, right? So what I think is ideal about this site is it's of a scale that the students can really get their arm around and talk about an implementation time frame that is within the foreseeable future. And it's not so far down the road where they're just stepping into something where there's already an owner or a sponsor that's got a site plan that's already been approved, and they're out, doing, with their architect doing construction documents, and they're going to pull a building permit in a month, and it's kind of like we're not open to new ideas. So it feels like this is kind of it's good timing on this one. At this point.
Bruce, and then Phil.
Just for people who are looking at this, the $40,000 seems like a lot at first, but I suggest it's pretty reasonable when you put it in terms of the bigger project that we're trying to do, and that's find a way to create a convergence of what goes on Santa Fe with what goes on the river, and that there's an economic opportunity and there's a recreational opportunity, and they both can enhance economic growth along the area. And that initiative is already going, and it may be with open space money to assist in this, or it may be with South Suburban Parks partnership, which was mentioned. But just the big issue is not just 2 parking lots full of cars, but it's the river and Santa Fe and what it can do for Littleton down in that part of our community.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. We periodically lament the fact that we receive projects when people want to bring them to us, and we struggle with how to give direction and guidance and point people in a direction of something we'd like to see done. I think this property is as you suggested, has a lot of opportunity in that regard. I'd agree with Councilmember Beckman. I think there's broad issues that come into play here, and we do have a little bit of experience with some of these academic, public-oriented partnerships. A couple of years ago, we did the DU marketing audit, which ultimately resulted in the website redevelopment project, which had some tangible benefits. So it's always interesting to see how these things play out and how you can engage people after you see the results, and I'm interested in pursuing it.
Bill?
Just a question to start with Glenn. Having had your discussions with Tim and Al, staff involvement, community involvement, how does that scope out and scale out as far as would we be prepared during the fall to participate from the staff perspective at least?
Yeah, I think what I like about the time schedule is it does give us the fall to gear up for it and put together the packet of information. And then I think it's kind of ongoing meetings with the teams. So I think it's a worthy devotion of staff time. And I think I have talked to another planning director who has participated. He said initially it was kind of intense, but they were able to deal with it just fine. So, and they really appreciate the amount of information we get out of it.
Yeah, and as Bruce and Bruce have mentioned, sensitivity in the community, because you're dealing with part that abuts the park. You certainly also have a interesting traffic intersection that is there, and so there's a lot of consideration on respect for the community. How does the community get to see what's involved, or having a chance? Because anytime something comes from somewhere with some recognition, because it's going to be an award winner at some point in time, folks are going to have a question as to the respect for the community.
There's an initial comment that I guess I wanted to kind of coattail for what Glenn said, and that is that when we worked with the city of Denver a few years back, that there are many layers as far as who you report to. Chief of staff, planning director, theaters and arenas. And there was a big concern as far as the students who typically are very anxious in terms of being able to get out and talk to anybody who will speak with them, that we, in essence, control the flow of information. So in essence, you shall not talk to any planning commission member. You shall not, call these particular individuals, and we will identify them. That you will get information from a pre-selected group, and these people are identified. And so in essence, we try to avoid what I call the free-for-all, like you getting a call on a Saturday afternoon from a student saying, hey, tell me a little bit about what your vision is of this thing. So in essence, we've learned that over the last 12 years as far as what to do, and I think that that's pretty important. The other aspect of this, and that is the idea of that there is, I think, a cross-pollination in terms of community benefit. One, in terms of the city of Littleton as a whole, in terms of getting a lot of kind of fresh thinking and fresh ideas on the table, in terms of the value received for the money paid. Two, to be able to come and test any kind of planning efforts, either in terms of a valley plan, a comprehensive plan, and or even the zoning, as far as is it working the way it should be. And I think that's the thing that everybody asks in terms of if you do a rezone or if you do a comprehensive plan, does it incorporate and does it encapsulate the right sort of things that you want to from a good planning perspective? Is it a good document that doesn't just sit on the shelf but is an active document? And I think that that's the one thing that the student teams will take this process through, is scrutinizing every single sentence of every single planning document known in this city, that they will scrutinize that frontwards and backwards. So the idea in terms of being able, if I, let's say, lived a little bit further west from this side across the river, I forget that development name, the idea, well, is that really putting good resources to use, and is it a benefit as a whole? And I think the idea of having many, many hours of planning is a good thing. Obviously, I'm a little biased because that's where I'm coming from, but I think the idea in terms of being able to, rather than just have one group's agenda, that you're getting multiple groups across the board, 7 different student teams, maybe it's 8 different teams, the idea of real estate developers from a variety of skill set, and highly respected in terms of name dropping left and right, they'll be involved with this project, and they will see it, and they will critique it as well. So the idea in terms of, if I lived in close proximity to that, or if I was a resident of Littleton, it's like, I think I'm getting kind of a great deal, and that is a ton of planning effort, but I'm not in essence feeling like I have to sacrifice anything. Because in essence, it's literally dealing with RTD's property. So I don't want to try to oversell it, but I truly think that there is a fundamental benefit for the immediate surrounds of people to the station.
Any other questions? Jim, do you have a question?
I'll just make a comment that somewhere in your files, Glenn, there's a number of design concepts for that property that when Al said they would investigate everywhere, there has been a number of designs that have come forth in the
I'm familiar with the
20 years
ULI
history.
study, right? That's the only one that I've seen, but I'll dig around. The one that ULI did for that site, I think, I don't know, that was maybe 5 years ago or so.
This is older than that.
Even before that, okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? I just had a quick question. You've done this for 12 years. Have any of those 12 plans actually been implemented?
That's a great question. We've tackled some pretty big ones. So the first one out of the gate was another tower down at Tabor Center, and that kind of got put on the drawing board with the economy. The other one was, another big one was Gates, the whole Gates rubber plant. That is, that property, they demolished one side of the factory. There's still one side of it standing. I understand that that's about to. Cherokee bought it. It went back to the, Gates now owns it again because they bought the note, and my understanding is it's going to get redeveloped. We use the example of High Point. That one was such a long-range plan. So one of the things that we've really tried to do with those examples is we've looked around and said, what has actually really gotten built? And I'm not sure that I can point to anything that has actually.
The short answer is we cannot point to say that building as a result of the challenge.
They're all still in some various phase of planning, but there's not like where there's a physical, structure standing that you can say this wasn't there before the challenge. It's now there as a result of the challenge.
But we have seen, for example, like the city of Aurora with their 9-mile station, as a result of the challenge there, it's rethinking how they're bringing the private sector developers to the table who own the King Soopers property and get them to talk with one another because, in essence, they've all experienced the challenge. So the idea in terms of, I think has heavy influence on each and every site that we've had. And I believe that in a very short period of time, there'll be a physical building we can say, see what we did in downtown Boulder in terms of this performing arts center is a result of the challenge. So.
Yeah, and I think this one, you know, this feels to me like it's one that might actually be the one that from the time of the challenge until the time of actually executing a plan, this has all the right makings of one that I think is very executable. So you know, that's just my speculation, but it certainly feels like it doesn't have some of the other challenges. That's why I think too big is a problem too. I mean, one of the reasons, you know, take 9th in Colorado, which was did we ever study that one? Mm-hmm. We did do 9th in Colorado. You know, 9th in Colorado had Shea Properties came, a huge national developer, couldn't get it done because it was just so big. And then this group, Sembler out of the Carolinas came in, it became Fuqua, and they couldn't get it done because sometimes these things just get so big and you're trying to balance all of these different constituencies and find the optimal mix of all these different uses and such a grand scale and then attract capital to those deals. So you're going to Wall Street to try to find this money. This to me feels like it's something that has all those same parts and all that same interest to make just a fascinating site to study, but is of a scale that I think is executable within the Denver real estate community. So I personally think it's going to it would happen, but I wish I could give you more tangible examples of that.
And just as a side note, RTD is instituting what they call the pilot program. I'm not sure if they're how familiar, but in essence, there's 3 selected sites.
Yeah, they didn't pick ours.
And they might kind of like revisit that as a result.
Well, we also have, wasn't there another study that's being done over there?
On that particular site?
Yeah, Dr. Cog.
Yes, there is one through Dr. Cog on the Oaks project through the Sustainable Communities Initiative. Mm-hmm. That's one of the sites that they determined they were
For
going to
TOD.
study.
And we are in that, right?
Mineral Station is in one of the 5 they selected in Metro-wide.
Are Dr. Cog's studies they're really more kind of a planning exercise?
That's correct.
Right, and I think that the deliverable that you'd see from this would dovetail with that in the sense that this, and one of the nice things about, I think, having the finance piece to it, because, if the project can't attract private capital, it's probably not going to get built, right? So the nice thing about these projects and the emphasis that we put on the financing piece is that we're really, as a group, as a judging panel, we're making sure that it's very clear that this has to pass the scrutiny of professionals who know that in the real world, this is what it has to look like to be able to attract capital, and if you can't attract capital. So I think it's taking maybe what Dr. Cog would do and then taking it from a very conceptual planning level to an actual plan that would.
The market analysis and the financial analysis, I think, is what creates another dimension above beyond just pure planning pieces. And that's the thing that I think is pretty cool about it.
I just find this very exciting.
Peggy?
So what kind of radius around that area do they look at? Will they look at all of Littleton, part of Littleton?
I think in terms of coming up with the optimal mix of uses that the market will bear. They would look at whatever they determine to be like say they would think that there should be some amount of retail development that would hopefully somehow be tied into.
Well, what I'm thinking of, something that we've approved but won't materialize until late next year or early 15, right, is the Breckenridge Brewery. So they should know that that's coming online. So that's the kind of thinking, I mean, that's part of the dynamic of that corridor, that one of the corridors there. So.
Agreed. And they should be, the students, I can almost assure you, would be diligent enough that they would, through their research, identify that development, even if they haven't even broken ground on it. And to the extent that they think that starts to establish this corridor as a destination for other uses that would complement that, if they think that would have an impact on what they would be the optimal plan for the site, they will address that in their plan.
the judging also looks in terms of what they call creative solutions, and that is, rather than just having a big piece of property that has to put something on it, maybe that there's looking in terms of land exchanges, land swaps, or in terms of funding, in terms of for open space. So the idea that they really, besides the financial and the marketing piece, want to look more holistic at this property. At the same time, the idea of sustainability. So the idea of, can they produce a LEED certified neighborhood development as well as a building neighborhood? Those are all kind of part of the grading system that they are put under. So it's, I tell you, I would be on my toes big time for any kind of scrutiny that the judges give these student teams to be able to, in essence, address it as thoroughly as they do. It is just pretty amazing.
Okay. Any other questions, Council?
For the children.
I guess my only trepidation with this is, well, not only the 40,000. I mean, I really think that needs to be split up pretty good. But just a concern with RTD, and their, you know, one of the things that I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see us put, you know, $20,000 or $30,000 or $10,000 into a plan that really does just sit on the shelf because the landowner isn't willing to do what needs to be done. Because this, we're talking, whatever they come up with, and hopefully it's brilliant, and hopefully it's creative, and hopefully everybody gets excited about it. But guess what? We don't own the land. RTD owns the land, and they may, you know, they can throw $10,000 into this or $20,000 to get the study done. That's still a study that's going to sit on a shelf unless a landowner is willing to do, you know, to make a move with it. So that, I guess that's where my biggest concern is, because we could take that same amount of money and hire a consultant to come in and work on another piece of property where we know we can have something happen.
You control it more.
Yeah. Or we have a willing landowner who's willing to, you know, we've got a corner in Littleton right now that really stretches almost half of Santa Fe that we've got opportunity for, you know, we've got a willing landowner ready to say, well, find us someplace else and go for it. That's more exciting to me than this parking lot. But I'm also coming from a different perspective. What you're doing with the students and all that, great, wonderful, on the street learning, I think that's great. But I would really like to see this be more than, particularly, it's one thing to write a check. It's quite another thing to use our staff time to the amount that I think it would be needed. And it will be Glenn's department. And right now, Glenn's department is probably one of the busiest departments in the city and will be through most of what you guys are talking about too. And we don't have, you know, we're not adding a bunch of staff into that department. So, I mean, I'm like thinking out loud a little bit, juggling this a bit, but those are some of my concerns. And you know.
Well, hadn't you heard that Glenn asked for $60,000
Yeah, what do you
for
mean?
consultants next year?
As far as RTD, you know, by pulling together a group of sponsors, there almost needs to be like a champion or a lead to kind of be a bit of a catalyst. And I wonder if the next step isn't to sit with Bill Saroy at RTD and A, see if they are excited about it, and B, see if they have a plan to make this available for private development to, you know, in some foreseeable time frame, or to your point, if he just says, you know, yeah, we'll throw it in just because it's interesting or whatever, and you know, we can withstand the amount of our contribution for the sponsorship dollars, but we're not really planning to see this actually put into production, if you will, as a redevelopment site anytime soon, then we have the answer to your question. I mean, selfishly, my firm would be very interested in redeveloping this site if it were available. So I know that this is a site that
Well, it's great
private
PR.
development community
It's
would
great,
be,
a great PR move for RTD to say, oh yeah, we're going to support the kids and look, because they know that's been an eyesore and a thorn in the side of Littleton for a long time, because they won't pave that dirt park, and it's over capacity. It's been over capacity since it was built, and there's, you know, probably 30 years, if ever, to Highlands Ranch, and by then, the changes in the population, the changes in everything is, will that even happen? So that's not even on our, we have little meetings every 6 months about it, but it doesn't, they're busy up north right now. So, I guess that would be, I think that would be important.
One of the, I think, fairly unique things with this site is they did purchase it with a certain kind of federal dollars, so they don't necessarily have as much as their funds invested. Now, in one way, that's a bit of a constraint in that now you have to convince the federal government, but I guess in my discussions with them, they think that's more of an opportunity, because if we're able to hit some federal goals with the redevelopment, then perhaps it could sell quicker. Now, I don't know if this site is unique for that, but that was part of our discussions with them. But ultimately, they had that decision, you're right.
What do you guys need from us tonight? Do you need?
Yeah, and I guess there's other sites you're looking at, and how does that decision be made?
What we're trying to do is make sure that we've touched base with all the appropriate potential sponsors in terms of evaluating them, grading them, and kind of working. We represent kind of quite a few people behind the scenes as far as the selection committee per se. What I want to be able to do is in terms of make sure that you guys are generally kind of nodding in terms of saying this probably makes sense, but we want to just make sure we understand the depth and breadth. For example, like overtaxing his department, I can clearly say I have another group that I'll bring to the table that really kind of does a lot, carries most of that water. So in essence, he can direct most of them. We have another group that will really work with the architectural resources and kind of orient them, and another group that will work with them with the marketing piece. So there's quite a few members of NAIOP that really get involved with this thing. You're just seeing two of many, many people. So I want to calm the fears as far as taxing him. I can speak comfortably that will not be the case, because in essence, we've got a lot of volunteer work that will really come to the table. I do hear your comment as far as the idea of making sure it's one thing to be a good citizen in terms of saying supporting the students, but in essence, I'm not coming here with that kind of mindset. It's the idea of really a benefit for the leadership of Littleton. Yes, it's RTD property, but I want to make sure that the idea of when we immediately go to RTD, which I'd like to tomorrow and call them in terms of sit down and have some meaty discussion, that is that we are of the impression that the leadership of Littleton is supportive of what we want to do here with the challenge. They don't want to go alone. That's what I've heard clearly from you. But so the idea of RTD, what's your position on that? And our job is to flesh that out right away.
My perspective, if it's not just an academic exercise for RTD, that indeed federal constraints, if there are any on that, are out there, and those can be dealt with, and I'll use an inappropriate word, overwhelmed, so that something actually could happen, and they would have an interest in participating to see that would happen. So it's not just go along, but indeed it's some of this fits more in their private-public partnership, and it's a way to have something happen on the Southwest line where they aren't looking to invest a lot other than adding a few other stations along the way. Then it ends up being exciting.
I think what I'm hearing as far as conditions of satisfaction are not going it alone and making sure that it's something that RTD supports actually executing within some near-term time frame. And I think we can have that conversation with RTD and report back through Glenn. Hopefully Glenn's present for that meeting as well and hear it firsthand. And if the answer to either of those things are no from RTD about their joint sponsorship and they're wanting to see it happen sooner than later, then that maybe that's where we kind of come to a dead end. But if they're supportive in the ways that we hope they are, then we keep going and we maybe speak to some of the private owners that are adjacent to it and see if we can kind of put together a conglomerate of sponsors.
Okay, I think the best thing to do would be if you guys could get back to Glenn with some of your responding to some of our concerns, and then we'll get that on the agenda, and you can address those at that time, because if we do decide to do this, we'll need to approve the funds in a regular meeting to move them through. So we could probably bring it into a general business, have another discussion about it. I mean, unless you think it's a big enough discussion to put on a study session.
No, I think we can do it as a general business item.
Okay. Jim?
I was just going to make a comment. If you're contacting Bill Soros at RTD, you might ask him who else will be involved, but Bill Van Meter might be a good person to also have there. He's the new assistant director to Phil Washington.
And I would also, I guess if we do get, and I don't know at what point this would be most appropriate, but I feel somewhat compelled to reach out to the Answer family on this. Okay. One of the challenges with the Answer property is, and you know, the Answer property is the across the street, is that the larger scale developers, the folks who are looking at, 100 acres plus, are, and even scale down from that, are not that much interested in some of the other things we have going on around, because they're waiting for something to happen there, because that's where they want to be. We have a property right now in Mineral that's suffering from that, because the commercial world is saying, I'm not going to put anything there because I want to go there. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to create a chasm, a collision of unintended consequences if we start working on this. And I think that while the Answer property is currently off the market, I mean, it will come back on, and at some point something will happen over there. But I think and this may be something that needs a little bit more of a, noodling, as Bruce would say, but some level of reach out to them in terms of this is what we're doing. And then, like I say, I mean, I understand we don't want to go do, 130 acre total thing, but I just feel like in order to, because whether we would do anything with it or not, and I would hope that we're not doing this just as an exercise, but sometimes just sending out the signal is enough to cause some ripples we may not have intended to cause. So that would be, I think, part of what I might ask you to come back with, some of those safeguards, some of those steps we might want to take, just because of the intricacies of some of our relationships.
Mm-hmm. If it came back after having that conversation that we really did want to look at, hopefully not all, but a portion of the South, like I don't really know what the vision is for that piece, but let's say that the 30 acres on the hard corner were intended to be commercial, and then it was going to get to some lower density.
Zoned that way.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you said, but should we look at both? Should we look at just the commercial piece, not all 100 and plus acres, but and that really for the city of Littleton to be supportive, that would be a very that'd be almost a requirement. We can have that conversation after you've talked to them, but I think we'd like to start with this nice bounded.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that not even worrying about doing a plan on the Answer property, but what you do there has to be
something complementary.
Yeah, and there has to be, I think, at some level an open dialogue so that they know what we're doing and
no surprises.
And why.
Right.
No surprises. Oh yeah, no surprises. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate this. Thank you.
RTD.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Pretty sure that.
And there's only 8 hours. Okay. Okay, so, thank you very much, appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care, man.
Okay, item D, Councilmember Cole, I have no idea what this is about, so go ahead.
So I'm glad to go ahead, but Michael had told me somebody on staff was going to present this.
Is anybody on staff presenting?
No.
We were told that you were going to do it.
Well,
That's what I was told.
on the tentative agenda, I called and said, am I supposed to be presenting? And he said, no, this was just to remind us that you're the one that requested. But since he's not here for me to have asked, I did anticipate that I might get asked. So, when we've done the budget for the past few years, we always struggle a bit with the donations to charities and other folks and so forth. And you remember some of the discussion last year at our budget session. We were trying to figure out who do we give money to that we've been giving to, because our resources are fairly strapped in that overall. And so a few months ago, I emailed Michael and I said, I think we should have a policy discussion on this. So the largest policy question is, should we be giving any public money at all to organizations, the donations that we're giving? So that's one question I wanted us to talk about. And if we do want to give, do something that I learned at the CML annual conference that some other cities are doing, municipalities are doing. They announce opportunities.
Peggy, I think, pull that, yeah, there.
You're talking too loud.
Thank you. Well, I'm doing both. I'm getting feedback and not getting heard either one. They publish a notice that monies are available, and then people submit applications so that the whole community has an equal chance of applying, and of course not everybody's going to get something. So those are some of the questions that I was hoping we might address before we get into the budget session this year, and again say, boy, we don't have enough money to do something, and should we do something at all? So.
Bruce.
And part of my thought at that time was just to pick one interfaith task force has traditionally found a way to help city operations. When police, fire, whoever finds folks that we just don't have a direction to help them, we turn them to interfaith. And there are other examples like that. So some of these are ones that augment our operations where others don't. And I thought that was a distinction that might be helpful also in whatever we do here with city funds.
Okay. Bill?
And just to layer on what Bruce is commenting, and to some extent these are not donations as much as they're contracts with an expectation of service that comes in. Personally, I would like to see that side of it tightened up on a report of what has happened and what might be an expectation, so that it comes with any request. I certainly am more than happy to extend that, hey, there's an opportunity, but to some extent there's also a contracting that occurs as part of the effort, and would like to see that tightened up. So as Mike's here taking information, what can be done around announcing, and also very much tightening the contracting process.
Sure, and the requests have already been received. There was a process. I wasn't part of it, but Marlene, when she was in the city manager's office, was organizing it. Last year, you gave about $59,000. This year, we have requests that total $220,000. We've got a placeholder in the budget right now at $80,000, which is above what you've given in the past.
That 200 includes GLYI?
No, the 200 includes specific requests from South Suburban Parks Foundation, which would be likely funded if council chose to do so outside of these funds. They could be done through open space or
We've
conservation
always
trust
done them
funds
outside of that.
Yeah,
Always
correct.
been open space money?
Yep.
Okay.
So if you take those out, it decreases that by about 120,000, 125,000.
Still really
It's still
a
pretty
lot
significant.
higher than it used to be.
Yeah. And there have been a number of new
Didn't last,
organizations.
less than 50? How much?
59,000 last year. And this year, like I said, we have a placeholder of 80,000 in the budget. With there's also a request from the downtown merchants that's never been funded before, basically to provide city services to things like the block party. So it wouldn't necessarily be a grant to them, it'd be to provide our services for that.
Peggy, can I go to Bruce? Okay, Bruce?
I'm leery to a certain extent of over-sciencing this stuff. I think I went to the CML session I think you're referring to, and for example, the city of Pueblo, I kind of think way over-rotates on some of this stuff in terms of quantification and criteria. To level set, I mean, $80,000 is less than 0.2% of our entire budget. I think we generally have a pretty good idea that, I agree with Councilmember Beckman, there's clearly with people like Arapahoe, Douglas Mental Health, there's corollary benefit to the community in terms of less application of police oversight when you get, people who are having support. We're not generally funding all of these organizations. We're contributing. They contribute to the quality of life in the community. I think quid pro quo, we have the ability to use our judgment to divvy up a finite amount of money, and frankly, I'm pretty comfortable with the process as it works right now.
Okay. Jerry?
Peggy, I appreciate you bringing this up, because I think it is worth talking about. What is the process? What are our expectations, and what are the guidelines for giving money just because somebody asked for it? I appreciate you bringing it up. So I think it does warrant more discussion.
Anybody else? Bruce?
I think the advantage, if we could talk about this before the budget session, because we could really get wrapped around the axle in the budget session trying to come up with a process. If we could come up with a process first and then decide how to apply it in the budget session, I think we'd be a lot better off on time.
Yeah, because you brought up good points on how does it really benefit the city, and that may be one of the criteria.
Well, I think if we're going to do something, we better make a decision tonight about how we want staff to bring this back to us, because for one thing, in the past, we have had the applications, and typically it was the same old people, same regular Joes that would bring it in, and every year they would ask for a little bit more. And some years we just said, do what we did last year. And some years we added someone or we took someone off. And a lot of it really is just what we want to do and who we want to support. And as, being out there, what we see working, Doctors First, Interfaith, Arapahoe County Douglas Mental Health. We've always argued about the battered women's shelter and those that are based in Denver, but do they serve our population, this type of thing. So I guess I would also agree with Mayor Pro Tem Stallman in terms of I really don't feel that we're overthinking this is going to give us a better process. I think what we need to do is simplify this so that we can look at these requests and make very quick and easy decisions. And if you guys want to create some sort of matrix, we can what is our first priority, then second priority, third priority, put those in that order. When we run out of money, we run out of money. Does that sound like something that would work?
Yes and no, because if we're going to approach this as a baseline for what we currently have been giving, I'm not sure that's the best way to go. We just heard this proposal, which requires some money. We haven't, I assume during the budget process, we'll talk about shopping cart and so forth. We have some really small yet big demands, and some big demands that are big demands in terms of dollars on our budget. And I'd like us to trim down, personally, I'd like to trim down what we're doing, maybe by the way we focus on it with, again, along the lines that Councilmember Beckman spoke and Jerry's speaking of, that
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to, is
so-
what's our top tier that we're looking at supporting, and then our second tier, third tier. I mean, like a top tier would be those that directly impact.
Yeah, so what I'm
Littleton.
wanting to get at is not tiers, but this is the criteria. This is what this is what's guiding the decision along the lines of what Bruce said, that there's some kind of benefit that is reducing the need for other city services, for example, something like that, so.
Bruce?
Well, but I mean, I guess, how do you want to quantify arts and culture? I mean, is it all about just reducing EMT calls and police response times? What about, what about some of the other stuff we support? What's the one, the symphony? I don't know. I mean, at what point in time does quality of life end up benefiting because we spread a little bit extra money around? I don't know how you quantify
Well,
that.
I guess the issue in my head with that is, if we're rolling in money, it's not an issue.
Well, this is
Or it may not be an issue, I'm not sure, but we're...
right, but we're still talking about less than 0.2% at the $80,000 number. And what's our reserves? $13-14 million or some such number? I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying. Nobody wants to waste money. But the argument that spending money on doctor's care or interfaith or Arapahoe Douglas mental health constitutes a waste item is sort of a stretch.
No, that's not what I said at all. Those would be ones that would absolutely make my cut.
Okay. Jim?
Well, we have a process in place now. And if we're going to change that, I guess I'd be interested in what you want to change in that process that would make it compatible. Right now, I don't see any need to change what we're doing now. I think it's very clear of what they've got to do in order to get a grant from us, the services they've got to provide. I think all that's already in place right now. I don't see a need to make a change.
Are there other groups out there that might be requesting something that would provide even more, even better?
And whenever those lists come to us, all of those come to us as to what they are. I submitted one that came to me from a fellow Dr. Cog board member who represents a large nonprofit organization and wanted to know if we would contribute some money to. I sent it on to Kelly, I think is who I sent it to have him fill out the forms, and it'll be evaluated along with everything else.
Well, that's somebody who knew you and must know that we do that.
Well, the nonprofits, I have to say, the nonprofit community, they have a process for this, and we're not the only city that does this, and they get the notifications from usually the PIO, and the requests come in. And so we do have that process, and the requests do come in, and there are criteria. And in the past, we've been given healthy packets that these guys have gone through and said, these are the number of citizens we've served in Littleton, and it's been in almost more detail than I think I personally would need. I agree. I don't know that the system is broken. I think that we have to make those decisions when they come to us, and we have to make those decisions based on where we want to put that money. There's 7 of us. It takes 4 votes to move it through.
So I just counted, there's 20 requests that you've received for 2014, and those include the 2 from South Suburban Parks Foundation. The requests have already gone out and come back to us. We do ask that they provide, the areas that they serve, the number of residents served, and those benefits to the residents and non-residents, and then what other governmental funding they do receive. So there's some explanation that you do have to fill out this form that answers those questions. And I guess that's what has been done historically as well. So
It seemed to me some years we do not really get all that information. and then we give because we've been given before. So, and I'm still wishing we would be a little more rigorous with it.
Well, and Peggy, I will say that the first couple years, we weren't getting that, and we were doing the, whatever we did last year. But then we did stress that we wanted to, and I think it was you that made that push, that we wanted to get more information. Who do these people serve? Are they real? Because we had some consternation between applicants that looked like they were just a Metro server as opposed to, well, what are you doing for Littleton? Because we know whose money this is. This is the taxpayers' money, so it needs to go back to serve their needs. Anyway, I guess at this point, unless there is a majority that wants to change the process, we'll go ahead and have this brought to us in the budget session with the information that we've received, and at that point, we'll make decisions. And at that point, also, I think we can make a decision about how much we want to spend.
Mike, can you go ahead and send out the criteria for our requests?
I'd be happy to. Like the mayor said, it would be in the budget, but I can provide this spreadsheet, which has all the information from the
If you do that,
applications. I'd be happy to.
Okay.
And that raises a side question real quick. When do we expect to get the budget book?
I believe printing is, 2 weeks?
Yes, 2 weeks from Friday, I think it was supposed to be set up. So you'll be getting, I don't have my budget calendar with me, but I'm just trying to focus, got petitions in my head. Probably the first week in September, I'm guessing. But I will let you know tomorrow. I'll just send that out to everybody because I've got the budget calendar. I'll just send it out to you all
So
in the morning.
no hope at all before Labor Day?
No, probably not.
Yeah, that would help, I think, for all of us, if we have a idea of what to expect and when.
On the budget?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send it out to you tomorrow.
And then just a calendaring note, we have 5 positions on authorities, boards, and commissions. We've got licensing, RFA. What's our? Riverfront Authority, Planning Board, Historic Preservation, and BOA. Building Board of Appeal, Board of Adjustments.
And if anybody's still listening to the meeting, these are filling vacancies.
Yes. So those 5 positions, and we have 8 applicants.
For all 5?
Yeah. So we need to set up interviews for 8 folks, and Wendy advertised this for about a month, and so we just got the 8. So
Wait a second, now, when we interviewed folks, we did say we'll keep your application for a year. So those applications and those that didn't get appointed would still be considered, should be considered, because we did tell them.
We can reach out and
But if you
contact.
remember, we didn't have a lot of applications. We didn't appoint someplace, Jerry.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot left.
Regardless, we did tell people that, so that should be considered.
And a number of them were for boards that aren't listed here, so, but yeah, we'll take a look at that, and we can give them a call and see if we can get any more. So what we need to do is find an evening where we can do interviews. Bruce?
Well, in the past, some of the boards have said we've got enough.
They've all asked.
Thank you.
Yep. Tried to talk a couple of them out of it, but they want, so. So we have budget coming up, the 16th, no, wait, the 20th, when is it? When are we doing budget? 23rd, 24th?
September 10th and 11th.
Not October, right? Good.
Is that the 3-night fest?
Yes.
Okay, so September 9, 10, 11 is budget.
Week after Broadstone, way to go, guys.
We're doing all.
Oh, man, okay. So,
clarify, I thought initially there were 2 nights, so the 3rd night is if we need it?
if we need it.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
So, I guess the typically, I think we've done it on a Wednesday night,
We usually
Or-
do it on Tuesday.
a Tuesday,
Or last year, we actually did.
on a fifth Tuesday. We don't do it on a
we did
council
No,
night.
we did it on,
It's on a Monday.
right before the budget hearings last year, when we did a couple of interviews for appointments. But that makes for an awfully long night for y'all.
Okay, so how about, does anybody have a problem with, I'm just going to start throwing dates out, September 5th, it's a
Hang on,
Thursday.
To the draft calendar.
I do.
Okay. And how about the 4th, September 4th, it's a Wednesday?
As long as it's in the evening, that's fine.
Yeah, it would be an evening. I think I think the best thing is to start at 6, so these folks have time to get off work. It'd probably be an hour. You good?
No, I'm okay with it, but we'll have spent how much time the night before on Broadstone?
Just stay over.
Well, we got to get this stuff.
All right, okay,
You
fair
got that
enough.
in your calendar, you're all excited.
You got 24 hours to sleep.
24?
Okay.
From 2 a.m. to when?
What time's the invite get over?
So if we say Wednesday,
Starts at
September 4th,
Supposed to be
at 6 o'clock?
And Debbie, if you can make that, if it's going to be on that Wednesday, 6:30 would be a better start time.
Okay.
And Vic, that Phil and I both attend Dr. Cog.
Okay.
It's 4 and it goes to 6.
Okay. I don't think 6:30 is a problem. Everybody would be okay with 6:30?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so September 4th, 6:30.
And Wendy, can you get us this in an email?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're all seeing the same information.
Put it on the calendar or something.
Thank you.
Okay.
The question is, if we're going to look back at the applicants that we interviewed before, do we re-interview them? And there are not very many of them.
I would think so.
I think we should, because they may be, it may be their second choice or something like that, which we may not have done an interview. I don't remember. I don't still have any of my notes on that. I don't think it has to be, interrogation, but at least howdy. And I think, Wendy, if you could also send the questions out too for the ones that we need. Okay. Okay, cool. Anything else? Okay, just also on calendaring, guys, we have the 22nd. Don't forget, we have our joint meeting with South Suburban Parks and Rec. That really is, we're doing it as a breakfast. It really,
It's here or there.
it's here. And the agenda is substantial. So I'm actually going to ask if we're going to send it out, and we've got a packet that comes with it. And it's about probably 9 pages. So we'll get that out to you as soon as we possibly can. Looking at suggesting then that we don't have a half an hour socializing, we grab breakfast, sit down, and plan to go to 9:30. If we wrap it quicker, we will. But this is a big meeting. It's really super, super important. We get the two boards together like this. We've got some big decisions to make, and a couple of other little issues have percolated up that we have to throw on the agenda that won't take a ton of time, but
So
while we're all together.
Maybe the breakfast could be here by 7:15, so.
It's always here by that time.
Yeah,
I'm just verifying, right?
yeah. It's usually here
Yeah, you might.
That was
by
always
7.
So that's a special
So-
meeting, special
Yeah.
council meeting?
No, it's a breakfast.
It's a breakfast.
But do we make decisions?
No,
No.
not formal.
No, we're not making any formal decisions. We're having a conversation between the two boards, and then we will go back to our respective boards and
Go back to our corners.
go back to our corners.
You also have a breakfast the following Thursday.
Yes. And that's the one we moved.
Library and Fine Arts over at the museum.
Oh, at the museum.
Yeah. And on that, if any of you have a particular item you would want added on that agenda, just shoot it to me, because I'll be putting the agenda together on that. And if you've got anything in particular on any of those, shoot me your agenda point.
That's the 29th, is that
Yep.
meeting on the,
29th.
I won't be there, I've already signed up for ULI.
Okay.
This meeting that morning.
Okay. Okay. Busy month. Parade, Saturday. Okay, we're adjourned.